Who would have thought that the archaeological excavation of mysterious ruins would disturb an ancient seal and lead to a catastrophe for all of humanity? A bloody fog spread rapidly through the cities, and anyone caught in its path could not withstand the mutation, went mad, and perished. And most other living creatures turned into terrifying, eerie, crimson monsters endowed with strange abilities. And in an instant, ordinary human life turned into a movie set. But unfortunately, this was reality. Wherever the monsters appeared, cities turned to ruins. Nothing could stop these monsters, and fear spread like a plague. The army and the authorities tried to fight back, but they were powerless. And at some point, there were more monsters than humans could handle. People weren't the same anymore either, because if a person didn't change, they simply perished. Only the chosen few could survive. There were individuals who possessed the strength, resources, and abilities to kill the monsters. They were no longer human in the conventional sense, and at some point, it was hard to say whether there was more of the human or the monstrous in them. This mutant guy had a very strange hand, more like a monster's, but something drew him to the doll lying among the ruins. He picked up the doll and, clutching it to his chest, felt the human part of his being prevail. The young man began to cry because he had been too late and had been unable to save his sister. 3 days earlier, red fog had been reported in various parts of the country, and the authorities had appealed to citizens, urging them not to panic. People were asked to stay home and avoid going outside unnecessarily, while the young man's family was driving in their car. When the military ordered them to immediately move the car off the highway and clear the way, it became clear that this was no trivial matter. The young man's father believed that politicians could not be trusted. He wanted to get his family out of the city. The man realized that if the military had been called in, it wasn't a natural disaster, so they needed to flee without listening to the reassuring speeches. In the backseat of the car sat his brother and sister. The girl was scared and clung to her brother. A strange noise came from the street, and everything around them was covered in a red fog. No one understood what lay behind that fog. Suddenly, another car fell from the upper bridge directly onto the car where the family was. Something had knocked it down. The family survived, but the car was wrecked, and the father's leg was pinned. Everyone turned around and looked into the car's windows, because when the fog cleared, their surprise and horror knew no bounds. And right in the middle of the street, a huge mutant monster appeared. The military fired at it, but the bullets did not harm the monster at all. The monster was getting closer, so the family decided to run out of the car and try to hide somewhere inside a building. The children got out of the car without any trouble, but the front of the car was crushed and it was impossible to open the doors to help their parents get out. The terrifying monsters were already just a few meters away. They were simply devouring people and advancing further and further. The sister was shaking with fear and sobbing. It became clear that a serious decision had to be made. The father wanted his son to act like a man and take responsibility for his sister's life, and the mother also begged him to leave and save Shu. At that moment, a huge, monstrous beast resembling a wild wolf was right on top of them. The poor, terrified children looked at their parents one last time, knowing it was the last time they would see them. The giant beasts were not only strong, but also terrifying and utterly bloodthirsty. The area was shrouded in a red mist. Finally, the brother decided to run and, holding his sister's hand tightly, dashed away. No one could explain what was happening. Animals and people, coming under the influence of the fog, were going mad. The brother and sister hid behind the shelves in the supermarket and now tried not even to breathe, so as not to attract the monster's attention. The young man realized that the supermarket was a great option. They could hide there and there were food supplies. He planned to stay there with his sister until the rescue team arrived. Suddenly, the girl began to suffer from terrible headaches. She screamed and couldn't hold back her tears. The young people's faces were covered with some kind of bloody spots. It became clear that the children had been poisoned and had inhaled the red mist, which was gradually seeping deeper into the supermarket. The young man wet a napkin with water and covered his sister's nose and mouth so she could breathe through it. But the young man himself was feeling worse and worse. His face, like his body, was pierced by excruciating pain, and his circulatory system seemed to be undergoing changes. Soon he could no longer hold back. The sensation of heat was literally tearing him apart from the inside, and the boy clenched his teeth tightly so as not to scream and scare his little sister. The girl noticed that something was happening to her older brother, but he kept reassuring her, saying that everything was fine. At that moment, a monster entered the supermarket and finally spotted the brother and sister. The monster lunged at the young people, hoping to devour them. It was large, strong, with huge teeth and a powerful tail. The young people tried to escape, but eventually found themselves surrounded by monsters, and it was unclear why the monsters weren't attacking them right away. At some point, another gigantic monster appeared, even more powerful and strong. The brother and sister huddled together in fear. The young man realized that the monsters had a leader who controlled their actions, and he also thought that this was most likely the last day of his life. The brother realized that it was even more dangerous outside the supermarket. He went back inside and decided to try to fight the monster that was in the store. The boy told himself that the monster only looked fierce, but in reality it was just a rabid dog. He picked up a stick from the ground and prepared to fight. The stick broke instantly, and the monstrous beast had already opened its jaws, ready to bite off half the young man's body. But suddenly an arrow flew into the rabid dog's eye, and it recoiled from the young man to the side. Shu was holding a crossbow she'd found in the supermarket. She was the one who'd shot the arrow into the monster's head and saved her brother. The boy praised the girl. However, it was clear that such an arrow couldn't kill the monster, and now the one-eyed beast wanted to devour the girl. She ran away as fast as she could. The young man felt worse and worse. His body was being torn apart from the inside. He could barely move, and he didn't understand why his mutations were happening right now. Shu ran through the store, fleeing the monster's pursuit, but unfortunately she fell, and now she was in danger. Suddenly, something so powerful slammed a shelf onto the monster, pinning it down. And now sitting atop the shelf was some creature that looked a lot like his older brother. He asked the monster how it dared to lay a hand on his sister, and then drove a stick through the monster's head. Zhu was just as frightened by her brother as she was by the other monsters. The girl rushed to calm the young man down, not understanding what was happening to him. She clung to her brother and repeated that she was fine, she was okay, and he needed to stop and calm down as soon as possible. The young man's mind was filled with images of his parents, who had asked him to take care of his sister and be a man. His parents had told him they would always be there for him and protect them. But now Hao had to move on with his sister Shui. The girl repeated several more times, turning to her brother, that everything was fine, and looked at him with a frightened and anxious gaze. The young man finally came to his senses and returned to his usual normal state. He apologized to his little sister for making her worry. However, the young people didn't get a chance to talk because another monster burst into the supermarket. They had to flee. The young man picked up a baton and began striking the monstrous wolf that had dared to scare his sister. To his surprise, the young man felt that he had become much stronger, and now his blows could handle the monsters. Hao told his sister to hide while he dealt with the monsters. The young man realized that the monster had spotted them, but now he decided to lure the monsters away from the supermarket. Zhu Wei threw herself into her brother's arms. The girl was afraid that he would lose control again and turn into a monster. But her brother reassured her, saying that this time he wouldn't lose control and would be back for her soon. She just needed to hide and wait for him. The young man promised that he would definitely return alive for his sister. Hao already had a rough idea of how his new essence worked. By killing monsters and absorbing their energy, he grew stronger. And now he stepped out to face the enormous monster. The boy knew that if he killed it, he would gain enough strength to protect his loved ones. So now this monster had to die despite its terrifying appearance and immense strength. Instead of a massive, big-headed monster, 3 mutant dogs appeared before the guy. The monster didn't think it necessary to fight some weak human himself. Hao took it in stride. He said he would kill each one in turn and get to their master and leader anyway. One of the mutants crept up behind the young man and bit into his shoulder with its massive jaws. But that wasn't a problem for him. On the contrary, Hao's rage was simply immense, and he tore the mutant apart with his bare hands. Looking now at his transformed hands, the young man realized what true power felt like. It was magnificent. The mutants fled in terror, sensing a formidable opponent in the young man. Hao stared at his hands, not understanding what had happened to them or what was happening to him at all. Meanwhile, the military arrived to help the residents, simply dropping shells from helicopters. Shu was scared. She was tired of waiting and stepped out of the supermarket, but the young man shouted at her not to go out. A powerful explosion rang out right in the middle of the street, and everything around was engulfed in fire, flames, and smoke. The soldiers went to look for survivors. They saw a wounded young man, but realized he was infected and left him to die, while they loaded the frightened girl into their helicopter. The soldiers acted very quickly, realizing that the monsters would soon reappear. The helicopter rose into the sky and flew off in an unknown direction. Shui wept bitter tears, not understanding why her little brother wasn't coming to save her. Hao was in such bad shape that he couldn't even stand up. He reached out his hand after the departing helicopter. Gradually, his transformations faded, and he became an ordinary person again. But now he had also lost his only family. Half a year had passed since then. The young man still hadn't brought his sister back. but at least he had learned to hide his mutation and look like an ordinary person. When the military took the girl away, Hao searched all the local refugee camps, but he never found any trace of her. To find Shui, the young man joined the lowest rank of the military, the Border Patrol, and became a private. In such turbulent times, only the army could gather intelligence and move freely. Hao was stationed at the border post in the city of Kishi. He apologized to the patrol squad captain for being late for duty. The captain kicked the young man in the back for loitering somewhere instead of taking his post. He announced that some important gentlemen would be arriving shortly, and then they could finish their shift. But for now, they needed to keep a close watch. Yan Hao climbed up to the watchtower. 6 months ago, an outbreak of crimson mist had erupted. Most of the cities had been reduced to ruins and had become havens for monsters. Along with the red mist, a mysterious crimson tower appeared. The survivors were forced to hide within the city walls, as far away from the tower and the mist as possible, just to survive. Yan Hao was now looking around, realizing that somewhere in that fog lived a monster he hadn't had time to fight. Captain Jia Jun had explained that there were special military units, and their outpost at the border was mostly for show, because if the special forces couldn't handle the monsters, then regular patrols certainly wouldn't be able to. They were talking about the famous special anti-monster unit. Everyone hoped that such soldiers could never be defeated. This elite unit had always destroyed any monsters without the slightest difficulty. Hao sat atop the tower thinking about how he still hated the smell of the blood mist, which awakened a primal thirst for blood in living creatures and drove them to kill one another. Hao noticed that the mist around the tower had dissipated, but it soon became clear something was breaking through toward the border. The other patrols also noticed some strange movement, but the captain said there was no need to panic. But there was reason to panic, because the fog had concentrated, grown thick, and was now rolling toward the checkpoint. Suddenly, 2 figures of soldiers in full uniform, masks and gas masks appeared from the direction of the city. Jia Jun tried to ask them what had happened, but the soldiers only shouted that they needed to run away and save themselves immediately. They didn't have time to say anything else, because something red sliced their bodies in half. The captain tried to radio that they needed to retreat and save themselves, but something grabbed him by the hood, preventing him from escaping. It turned out to be a huge creature resembling a dinosaur. It had emerged from the fog and was now holding the captain with one claw. Yan Hao was up above and none of this affected him, but the young man could hear his comrades urging him to run and save himself. Hao jumped down from the tower, and as he fell, his body began to transform. He landed on the ground, already a mutant. The next monster opened his jaws wide, hoping to swallow the man whole. But Hao was in such a state that he tore the monster in half with his bare hands. The young man felt absolutely wonderful. After killing those 2 monsters, he had grown even stronger and felt a surge of power. Now he wanted to know how he would feel after taking on several monsters. And just then, the opportunity presented itself. Yan Hao concentrated and steeled himself. He hoped his strength would be enough, and that his fearsome hands wouldn't let him down in this situation. But suddenly, a projectile flew over his shoulder, tearing the monster in half. The young man looked back and through the swirling red mist, saw the silhouette of a girl holding a weapon. It was the captain of the Burning Blood strike team, named Sun Rui. She was watching the events unfold with interest. Hao also realized that things were looking bad. People from the special unit had arrived, and he needed to urgently assume a normal human form. Captain Sun Rui ordered her subordinates to destroy absolutely all the monsters and leave not a single one alive. The soldiers aimed their rifles at the young man standing in the crimson mist. Finally, he raised his hands and said they shouldn't shoot him. He was Yan Hao, a private in the patrol unit. In response, a burst of automatic fire rang out, and the huge monster, which had been hiding in the fog until then, sustained multiple wounds. The target had been eliminated. The captain approached the young man and asked where his weapon was, looking at him suspiciously. While the young man tried to come up with an answer, the squad finished clearing the defensive line and was preparing to retreat. The Special Forces unit took Yan Hao with them, and together they arrived at their temporary camp. Song Rui read the report. At the forward outpost, 2 soldiers from her rapid response unit had been killed, and 30 from the patrol unit. In the center of the room, sitting on a chair with handcuffs on his wrists, was patrol soldier Yan, who didn't understand why he was being held after all. He was a victim too. Captain Sun replied that the young man had left the military unit for a couple of hours before the incident, and when he returned, the bloody mist uprising had begun. This was highly suspicious, and now the young man had to explain himself. Hao said he had simply dozed off in the nearby ruins, which he later reported to his captain. It turned out that this guy was always late for his assignments, and the commander always covered for him. Captain Sun thought that patrol unit was full of problems, and basically they didn't concern her. Jia Jun lay on a hospital bed, completely bandaged and unconscious, but the doctor said the captain wouldn't die according to the examination results. His health was more or less normal. Sun Rui read the detained man's personnel file. He had completed basic training just 3 months ago. 2 soldiers from the special unit had died in that battle, and the captain couldn't understand how Yan Hao had survived. He lowered his head and said he was very afraid of dying. He had done track and field in school, so when he saw the fog rolling in, his first instinct was to run away. The captain replied, "If the young man was so afraid of death, then why did he join the army? He must have had some kind of goal." Hao didn't mention that he was searching for his sister for the past 6 months. He had been relentlessly hunting down low-level monsters and absorbing their power. Gradually, Hao learned to control his transformation into a beast and his return to human form. For 6 months, the young man lived like a lone wolf, shunning people. He searched every ruin in the most primitive way, looking for human settlements. Sun Rui couldn't calm down at all, because this soldier valued his life above all else, had left his military unit without permission, and had also concealed information. The captain approached the young man and asked if he knew where this would lead. But then the captain leaned in and quietly asked the young man, so the others wouldn't hear, "What's wrong with your hands?" And then she added, "Why are you making up these lies and what is your real goal?" But the next moment their conversation was interrupted because the ground shook. The captain thought it was an earthquake, but Hao already understood and remembered that familiar sensation. He jumped up from his chair and shouted at the captain to leave quickly. Of course, he could have added that a huge number of monsters were approaching. Captain Sun was furious. That insolent fool had dared to run away right before her eyes. She lunged at the young man and stopped him by slamming his face into the ground. The blow was so powerful that the floor cracked, and the soldiers asked the captain to calm down and control herself. Suddenly, everything around them began to crumble, as if an earthquake were actually happening, and everything collapsed. The young people found themselves somewhere deep underground. They couldn't understand what had happened or where they had ended up. Yan Hao came to after the fall. It seemed they had fallen underground. The captain ordered the soldier to set up lighting because it was too dark there. And the private believed that this guy was bringing bad luck. Wherever he showed up, trouble followed. When the light came on and they were able to look around, it became clear that they had ended up in an underground labyrinth dug by monsters. At their feet, they found the weapons that had fallen with them. The captain ordered them not to panic, to stay in formation, and to be alert. Yan Hao sensed that the sound of the wind was coming from one of the underground passages, which meant there might be an exit there. The private approached the passage and confirmed that the wind was indeed coming from there. And so, thanks to Yan Hao, they found the exit, because he had a talent for it. The private was so captivated by the breeze blowing at him from the passage that he didn't even notice the enormous monster approaching him from the other side. The captain quickly drew her sword and struck the monster, which had still managed to release a stream of liquid. The soldier was lucky because the liquid fell very close to him. It was poisonous, and contact with it had to be avoided at all costs. The captain reiterated that without her orders, no one was to act or move even a few meters away. Captain Sun told the young man that it seemed he really was able to avoid danger. Once they got out of there, he would definitely have to explain how he did it. Yan Hao realized that the captain knew his secret, but she wasn't saying anything about it directly right now. She probably had her reasons. No sooner had the people left the dungeon than they heard a noise, and it became clear that something was approaching. Soon, a horde of monsters emerged from several passages. There were far more of them than it had seemed at first, and they surrounded the soldiers. Hao knew things were looking bad. The soldiers fired their weapons, but it wasn't enough to kill the monsters. It only slowed them down a little. The captain ordered them to simply run away, and now she saw that the young man was slowing down. Yan Hao noticed that the swarm of these monstrous insects had, for some reason, frozen in place and stopped pursuing them, though there was certainly no point in hoping for anything good. And indeed, soon the people saw a Lord-level monster in the red mist. It was huge and terrifying. Even ordinary monsters feared it. It devoured the red mist and grew stronger with every passing moment. Another major drawback was the fact that this monster was converting the red mist into energy. Yan Hao shouted to his comrades to be very careful, because this creature was far too dangerous. Captain Sun fired her weapon and hit the Lord Monster right in the head. In response, a blow from the red mist was immediately delivered, and the captain realized she wouldn't have time to escape and hide. But suddenly, Yan Hao appeared between her and the monster, and with his hand he managed to stop the beast's attack. The captain was very surprised. She didn't even try to ask questions. Hao himself said he would explain everything once they got out of there. But whether they would be able to do that was still unclear. The monster was incredibly strong, and where it had been wounded, there was only a small scratch that couldn't possibly affect its strength or abilities. The captain realized that even her attack hadn't worked. Could this guy really have a way to stop the monster? Yan Hao no longer saw any point in hiding his power. It had manifested, and now he was ready to fight the monster. This opponent was at the Lord level, exactly the same as the one he hadn't been able to defeat on the first day. But now Hao was much stronger, and besides, he wanted to find out how much stronger he could become if he devoured this Lord. Hao realized that his opponent was extremely powerful. Ordinary monsters would have been blown to pieces by now, but this colossus was like a massive armored tank. The monster wasn't just defending itself against the man's attacks, it was trying to kill him as well. Soon the young man realized that this monster was too slow. It had focused all its efforts on defense. This was actually to his advantage, because now the monster was simply a walking target. The soldiers fired at the monster's back. It seemed like a dream to them. Everyone thought Yan Hao was a coward and a weakling, because he always ran away faster than anyone else. The soldiers thought the guy was afraid of death, but in reality they simply hadn't seen him in battle until that moment. And now they wanted to know who he really was, if he was fighting a monster with his bare hands. Captain Sun Rui said that this guy was an experimental fighter secretly created by the government to fight monsters. It sounded very strange because the guy couldn't even pass basic training and was constantly running away. But the captain was certain he was a fighter from the experimental unit because he had managed to shield her with his hands from the monster's blow. Her deputy, Im Yonji, heard about experimental fighters for the first time and realized that Captain Sun was hiding something from him. The captain believed that Hao had escaped from the laboratory and infiltrated the border patrol. Deputy Im suggested that the previous incident involving the red mist had been caused by Hao. The captain replied that she wasn't sure, but she had to check something. However, all of this was a top-secret government matter, and no one was to say anything about what had happened here. Hao continued to fight the monster, directing the energy of the red mist at it. The monster also attacked the guy, and he had to maneuver to avoid being hit. At one point, they both found themselves defenseless against a powerful burst of red mist. Sun Rui came to, sitting with her weapon in her hands. Everything around her was shrouded in smoke. The soldier came to, unable to believe he was still alive. He was lying on the ground, but he knew for certain he hadn't died. The soldier sat up and realized he had survived thanks to Deputy Im, who had shielded him with his own body. It was very touching since he was just some lowly patrolman. Deputy Im examined the wounded leg and said that one leg for one life wasn't such a bad trade-off. The soldier was very worried because the special unit's mission was to fight monsters, and he couldn't afford to lose his physical abilities over a mere human. But the deputy captain replied that he had joined the army not to fight monsters but to protect people, and therefore he could not abandon a single person. At that moment, Yan Hao flew across the entire dungeon and finally came to a stop, collapsing against the wall. The young man felt that the energy of the red mist had dried up, and it was difficult for him to maintain even a partial beast transformation. The boy now understood just how powerful a Lord-class opponent was. He would really have to work hard against him, and he still needed to gather his strength. An unexpected explosion rang out above the monster's head. It was clear he didn't like it and felt the pain. Hao looked back. He realized that Captain Sun had joined the battle. The girl was firing her weapon. She said that Yan Hao couldn't die here because there were still too many things he needed to explain to her. The wound on the monster's head, again, was insignificant, and now the monster was mockingly laughing at the people. It was growing stronger again. Red mist was pouring out of the caves, and the monster was channeling it, drawing extra energy from it to heal its wounds. And now it was possible to see clearly how the monster was healing the wound by directing the red mist straight into its center. The wounds were closing, and it was ready to fight again. If this continued, the monster would recover to its full strength. The captain realized that the sudden appearance of the red mist at the forward outpost was the work of this monster. The captain believed they wouldn't be able to kill the monster, so they needed to retreat as quickly as possible while they still had the chance. But Hao refused, saying that the monster had to die right here and now. It was summoning the red mist, which served as a source of replenishment for Hao. Right now, the monster still couldn't move properly, and this was the best chance to attack, but the captain feared that Yan Hao would die if they failed. The young man replied that he had stood at the gates of hell countless times before, and one more attempt wouldn't make much difference. Sun Rui understood the logic behind the young man's words. She agreed and said they had only one chance. The captain said she would unleash all her power and help the young man pierce the monster's head armor, and he must immediately destroy the monster's brain at that moment. The captain believed this was the only way to defeat the monster, and the girl took aim, looking through the scope of her weapon. On command, she fired, and the shot was successful. The monster's head armor cracked open. Yan Hao was already nearby at that moment and immediately leaped onto the monster's head. The young man attacked the monster's brain, and wild screams pierced the air. The monster's body shook with convulsions and spasms. It soon became clear that the plan had succeeded and the soldiers had done their job. The monster's head exploded, scattering into pieces in all directions. Yan Hao was thrown far away by the blast wave, and now the captain rushed to the young man to help him. Judging by his appearance, the young man was unconscious. He lay motionless on the ground, his arms spread out to the sides. Sun Rui knelt down beside the young man, and as she tried to unbutton his jacket to help him breathe, she saw a photograph in his pocket. In Yan Hao's hand was a magic stone, which for some reason had begun to penetrate his body while he was unconscious. The young man couldn't figure out where he was. A red mist floated before his eyes, and it also felt as though he were examining his own body under a microscope. The young man decided that he had died and was now calmly moving into some other dimension. But soon he saw something sparkling like DNA. A purple nucleus was also floating in space near the young man. He didn't understand what it was. Hao remembered that this mysterious thing had been inside the body of the enormous monster he had fought. The young man assumed it was some kind of energy formation, but he had held it in his hand, and now Hao saw a stone in his chest. Suddenly, the core began to absorb the red mist, and the young man watched with interest. The young man realized that the core could not only absorb the red mist, but also store it within itself, which meant that if he absorbed even more mist and transformed into a stronger beast form, he wouldn't have to fear losing control. Most likely, this crystal has a limited energy capacity, and if the flow of red mist doesn't stop, the crystal will shatter. Hao realized that the monster he had been fighting consumed a huge amount of red mist, and now, if he could absorb this mist, it would be better to gather it and keep it in one place. The young man lay in a hospital room. Red mist was emanating from his chest. Suddenly, he woke up, sat up, and now felt the red mist being controlled by his hand. At that moment, the door to the hospital room swung open, and Captain Sun Jui appeared in the doorway. Sensing danger, the young man was forced to react instantly and somersault backward over his head. He realized there was no way he could stop this attack. He had to do everything possible to avoid harming the captain. The explosion was directed toward the window, and now the shockwave had not harmed his visitor. A few minutes before this incident, a soldier approached the captain to report on the condition of Deputy Ima's leg. However, the captain believed that every soldier was prepared for injury, so the soldier should not blame himself. The captain's deputy asked how Yan Hao's recovery was going. The man admitted that he had never heard of test subjects before. The captain replied that this was top-secret information, so the man should focus on healing his leg and not worry about the rest. Song Rui admitted that she had already submitted a request to headquarters to have the man transferred to a rear unit. From that point on, he could rest. However, the deputy said he would report everything to Chief of Staff Sun Lian, who was the captain's father, and the chief himself would decide everything. This greatly angered the captain. She said she was the adjutant's direct commander, and from that moment on, his access to communications would be suspended. He must stay in the hospital and not go anywhere. After finishing her visit with her subordinate, the captain went to check on Yan Hao, who was also undergoing treatment at the hospital. Approaching the doors of the young man's ward, the captain left the soldier at the entrance and ordered him not to let anyone in without her specific permission. The next moment, she flung open the hospital room door and nearly got hit by a blast of red mist energy. Yan Hao looked frightened. He hadn't expected to see the captain and hadn't yet learned to control his new abilities. Sun Rui managed to crouch down, so the blast flew over her, knocking the door into the hallway. The soldier on guard survived, having been struck by the shockwave. The blast itself was so powerful that it tore through several houses before dissipating. Sitting in his quarters, Adjutant Im realized that the abandoned building had been blown right through, and that this was Yan Hao's doing. The military man wanted to know how long Captain Sun could keep this hidden. The unfortunate soldier couldn't understand why constant problems kept falling on him. He was terrified, and he didn't want to die. Looking at the aftermath, Sun Rui realized that the young man had mastered the technique of the monster they had been fighting. I'd like to know how Yan Hao can use the monster's abilities directly, even without combat gear. The young people had a serious conversation ahead of them, so they went up to the hospital roof so no one would disturb them. Captain Sun realized that the young man could not only absorb the monster's cores, but also adopt their abilities. The young man added that in addition to this, he could also absorb the red mist and store it, and the crystalline structure inside his body seemed capable of regenerating itself. The captain thought about all this. concluding that the young man's abilities were more than enough to fight the monsters effectively. Hao confirmed that he had gained power and abilities, but the boy feared that he would gradually turn into a monster himself. And now he was upset, not understanding who he was, whether he could still be considered a real human being. The captain replied that the young man was a unique and singular being, and whether he was a monster or a human depended on how Yan Hao chose to use this power. However, things were not so simple with this power. It is both a curse and a weapon, so Hao now has two paths. He can join the Burning Blood and become a candidate for Captain Sun Rui's squad. The second option is to be deemed a threat and face extermination, like any monster. It's a bit of a choice, you might say, but being marked for destruction can hardly be considered a choice. Captain Sun admitted that she can't do anything about the guy right now, but the city's army is in principle capable of destroying such a monster. Of course, it's foolish to think that Hao is capable of standing up to monsters and special forces on his own. But if he joins Captain Sun's squad, it won't hurt him. He'll have a place, access to information, and resources. The captain promised to shield him from any trouble. Hao wasn't a naive fool. He understood that accepting a dangerous individual with uncontrollable power whom he barely knew into the squad was foolish, and that the captain likely had another motive. The girl confirmed that Hao was indeed smart, and for certain reasons she really needed him. The captain also added that they weren't enemies. After that, she handed the photo to the guy and said he could consider it a deal. Hao couldn't figure out how the captain had gotten that photo, since he always kept it in his jacket pocket. Sun Rui asked him not to underestimate her. She could dig up everything about his life if she wanted to. But if he joined her squad, the captain promised to mobilize a top-tier intelligence network and help find his sister. Hao understood that searching alone was like wandering blindly. There were always limits, and with a higher rank in the army, he would have greater access to information and freedom of action. Yan Hao said he was ready to make a deal with the captain, but he had one more request if she needed him that badly. Yan Hao asked for a raise, figuring it wouldn't be a problem since all his previous earnings had gone towards searching for his sister. The captain looked at the young man and addressed Private Yan Hao as captain. She appointed him a candidate for the squad, with pay at the highest rate. Now the young man had to go and process the paperwork. The young man saluted Captain Sun and went to the patrol department to hand over his duties. Captain Sun added that she had already paid the compensation for the damage at the hospital, but the young man shouldn't get his hopes up too soon because it would be deducted from his salary. A military vehicle pulled up near the headquarters of the Chishi City Patrol Unit. A soldier got out of it. He had previously served alongside Hao on patrol and was now planning to transfer to the special unit as well. The young man said that Captain Sun was very pleased with them, and although he would be in the rear detachment, it was still better than sitting here on patrol. Besides, they would be able to look out for one another. Yan Hao looked at this sincere young man and couldn't for the life of him remember his name. He had never paid any attention to other people before. The soldier waved his hand. It turned out he had spotted Captain Jia. The captain had indeed survived the red mist attack, and he was fine. However, now the captain, with a cast and a crutch in his hands, was surrounded by a group of young men. One of the guys turned to the former captain and said that he had once slapped him over some woman. And now that Captain Jia was without a patron, he hoped the unit would pay compensation for his disability. Zhang Shi struck the captain, knocking the crutch out of his hands. A soldier from the patrol unit rushed at the young men trying to protect his captain, who was being taunted. However, he was immediately grabbed and subdued by young men from the city garrison. Their commander continued to mock the wounded captain. He demanded that the captain get down on his knees and lick the mud off his boots. And if he didn't do it, they would break this soldier's arms and legs right then and there. And he too would be forced to use crutches. Captain Jia realized he had to obey the order and began to kneel. But at the last moment, Yan Hao supported him and asked his commander not to do it. The young man told the captain that he had helped him a lot in the past, turning a blind eye to his tardiness and treating him well. Now it was Hao's turn to repay the favor. Yan Hao addressed everyone present and said that if anyone so much as touched Captain Jia, he would break their bones and burn them like firewood. Of course, the guys were furious when they heard this and immediately rushed at Hao with shouts, thinking he was asking for a beating. Yan Hao, without flinching, calmly began beating them. The first attacker took a kick to the jaw. The second one also got hit in the jaw, but this time with an elbow. The blow was powerful and knocked the opponents out instantly. And a few more men were simply scattered and beaten with light movements of his fists. And now the entire area near headquarters was littered with beaten soldiers from the city garrison. Their captain was unpleasantly surprised. He couldn't believe how this guy had taken care of his men in 4 seconds. Zhang Shi drew his weapon and pointed it, saying that the scum from the patrol unit had no business going against the garrison. He fired several times, but Hao calmly dodged, and the bullets flew past him. The young man grabbed the commander's pistol, saying that it fired too slowly, so such a weapon should simply be thrown away. The young man tossed the broken pistol aside, saying that the city garrison commander wasn't even close to Captain Sun Rui, who actually knew how to shoot. The commander pulled out a knife, but it too proved useless. And in the end, Yan Hao lifted the man up by his outstretched arm, saying he couldn't forget how the man had just tried to force Captain Jia to his knees. Zhang Shi already realized that his opponent was very strong. He was terrified and tried to calm the young man down so that Hao wouldn't do anything serious. But Yan Hao slammed the garrison commander to the ground with all his might, saying that now it was his turn to lie on the ground. Hao looked around. No one else wanted to mess with him. The guys were in shock because they'd seen the young man dodge a bullet and crush the pistol with his bare hands. Hao paid no attention to anyone. He was analyzing his body. It had become even stronger, its power exceeding all expectations. The terrified soldiers from the city garrison ran away, and the young man picked up the captain's crutch. His patrol partner said that Hao had just been acting like a war god. The young man himself felt more or less okay after the beating. Captain Jia thanked Hao for his help and for saving him, but the young man said he had simply stood up for the man who had always looked out for him. However, Captain Jia was worried that the commander of the garrison unit would now start harassing the young man. But there was no need to worry about that, because Yan Hao was now a member of the special unit, and the garrison wouldn't dare do anything to him. The special unit's temporary base was located in the city center. Yan Hao reported to the captain that he had completed all the formalities related to the transfer, and Sun Rui had also submitted a request for Hao to join her unit. Headquarters had already approved the transfer, and Yan Hao could now be considered a full-fledged member of the special unit. However, the captain asked him not to rush. To become a member of her unit, he had to pass a real test. Yan Hao had to immediately go to headquarters in the city of Hukan and take the entrance exams for the special unit's combat division. But the captain was confident that with his abilities, the young man would easily pass the test. Hao told the captain to expect a new record from him. The very next day, the military arrived in the city of Huchin. This city was the capital of the special units. It was also where the Fiery Blood headquarters was located. They say that official Flaming Blood fighters are at least D-class warriors. Yan Hao wanted to know how this combat rank was determined because his comrade was a real weakling. It's unclear how he'll participate in the Fiery Blood selection if all he can do is take hits. Song Rui said that the soldier had joined the support unit, not the combat unit, so he didn't need to go through combat selection. However, the rear guard sometimes fights alongside the combat unit, so Yan Hao could count on his old friend from the patrol squad, but for now, the guys had to review their theoretical knowledge. Soldiers who can use superpowers are called warriors, and warriors' combat effectiveness is divided into 6 ranks. The special unit headquarters has a ranking system based on physical strength and endurance. All monsters are divided into several categories based on their strength levels. These can be hounds and scouts. The strongest ones are lords and titans. Fighting them is always more difficult, and they combine several elements. But the strongest and most terrifying are the monsters in the disaster category. It is practically impossible to defeat them. Typically, a Class E warrior can defeat a scout-level monster, and a Class D warrior can handle a hound-level monster. Class B and C warriors are equal in strength to lord-level monsters, and a Class A warrior is equal to a giant-level monster. Only a Class S warrior can face a catastrophe-level monster. In addition, rank is also influenced by the degree of compatibility with the monster's core, something Hao knew absolutely nothing about. It turns out that in this world, only monsters mutated from the red mist possess superpowers, while human warriors can only activate abilities using core-powered weapons, that is, through compatibility with monster cores. Physical form, talent, luck, all of these factors influence compatibility with the core. Sun Rui explained, the higher the compatibility, the greater and more powerful the abilities that can be awakened in each specific warrior. But if the core is completely incompatible, the warrior is assigned an E rank. Suddenly, the cars came to a stop because the road was blocked by armed men. They asked us to wait a moment and apologize for the inconvenience. Captain Sun couldn't understand how these people dared to stop the special unit, but they replied that they were also carrying out official duties, so there was nothing they could do. Several expensive cars drove by, and the captain realized that bigwigs from the Green Vine Corporation had arrived for the Fiery Blood selection. Something was off about this. However, in the end, everyone made it to the entrance exam site. Fiery Blood is humanity's most reliable pillar and, at the same time, the special unit's sharpest blade. The chief examiner of Fiery Blood was a Class A warrior. He said that regardless of connections or background, only the local rules applied here. It is impossible to pass this selection through connections or bribes, and no matter who the applicant is, they will achieve nothing without true strength. They must forget about staying in Flaming Blood. The first test was a physical fitness test. The examiner gave the signal to start. He had to run 100 meters while carrying a 50-kilogram load. Hao handled it with ease. Next was the kettlebell press. With electromagnetic assistance, the guy lifted 500 kilograms with one hand. Next was the striking power test. The force measuring device turned out to be damaged, and the data could not be recorded. 10 minutes after the test began, Yan Hao reported to the chief examiner that he had successfully completed all the trials. Lin Yuxing checked the records and confirmed completion, awarding the young man a final score of 198 points. It was a crazy record, because the previous rookie record was only 140 points. The guys thought this rookie must be cheating. Zhang Jin was the younger brother of the city garrison commander. He too was surprised by such a large gap in the scores and said he didn't believe in their integrity. The chief examiner replied that he had personally supervised every stage, and besides, there was a video recording of the exam, so there was no reason to suspect him of favoritism or lying. Zhang Jin immediately backtracked, saying he wouldn't dare suspect the examiner of anything, and asked the super rookie what his name was. Upon learning that he was Yan Hao from the patrol squad, Zhang replied that he simply wanted to say hello to a fellow townsman. But in reality, he intended to take revenge on this upstart, because the insult his brother had suffered was impossible to forget. It was a humiliation. Yan Hao also immediately understood the family ties between this stranger and the commander of the city garrison. The chief examiner said that the young man's name was Zhang Jin and that he was the son of the head of the Kishi city guard. Yan Hao replied that they were not acquainted. Hao immediately realized that the city guard was a bunch of rotten-to-the-core people. Lin Yongxing announced the results of the physical test. He listed all the candidates and stated the number of points each had earned. At the end, the person with the highest score in first place was announced. It was Yan Hao. Among the applicants was an older woman, Jin Ying, a research assistant at the Technical Intelligence Bureau. She had originally come to the selection process just for fun, but there was a very strong newcomer there, and she decided to study him closely. Zhang Jin was sitting in his dorm room, talking to someone via video call. He was supposed to take first place based on the test results. Who could have known that two monsters would appear so suddenly? Besides, if it weren't for his older brother, who had become a dog at the Green Vine, Jin wouldn't have been eligible to participate in the selection at all. The men warned him that the young man had only one chance and must not let it slip away. The young man replied that for his brother's sake, he had to make it into Fiery Blood. The next day began at the Animal Core testing site. This test was simple. All he had to do was put on a bracelet. The chief examiner demonstrated and explained everything to the candidates. After that, a Beast Core was placed in the bracelet for testing. Those candidates whose compatibility with the Beast Core was found to be below 40% were immediately eliminated from further testing. To ensure that no one was left in the dark, the examiner decided to briefly explain what a Beast Core was. Only creatures of the Hunting Hound rank and higher are capable of producing a Beast Core. The stronger the creature, the higher the quality of the core it leaves behind. If a Beast Core is inserted into a weapon made from a creature, a warrior can use abilities just like the monsters themselves. Each person's compatibility with a Beast Core is unique. It can grant them power. Depending on compatibility and innate talent, different abilities are awakened in a person. This bracelet is the most primitive weapon made from a beast. It can only test compatibility and grants no abilities. When the warriors officially join the Fiery Blood Special Forces unit, they will be given cores and weapons. So the compatibility test with the Beast Cores began, and now the candidates approached one by one and put on the bracelet. After that, the result appeared on the screens, and if it was below the acceptable level, the candidate was disqualified. One young man was very upset. He had passed the physical fitness test with flying colors, but it turned out that his innate abilities did not allow him to continue the trials. The next candidate was luckier. He passed with a score of 56% and could now join the squad. It was Zhang Jin's turn. The young man was confident and not nervous. Jin approached the table, put on the bracelet, and was supposed to place the Beast Core inside. The result was astonishing. The match was 60%. No one had ever achieved such a result, even compared to previous years, and everyone thought a new, powerful warrior had emerged. Zhang Jin was very pleased. He considered all the other contenders to be a bunch of nobodies because he was the best one here. Jin Ying spoke to Hao. She said that for some reason she hadn't heard of such a strong guy like him before. The girl explained that she worked at the Technical Intelligence Bureau and knew everything, but now she couldn't understand how Yan Hao had managed to slip past her notice. The girl immediately realized that the recent abnormal fluctuations in the concentration of red mist in Kishi City were clearly linked to Hao. The guy immediately started to change the subject, saying that he didn't understand anything at all. However, the girl wasn't upset. She said that the main thing wasn't that Hao wouldn't admit it, but that he had really piqued her interest. Hao smiled at the girl, calling her Miss Know-It-All, and asked if he could ask her a few questions. Jin Ying agreed and promised to tell him everything he wanted to know if his score turned out to be higher than hers. And then the girl would tell him absolutely everything. At that moment, she was called in for the test. Jin Ying immediately went to put on the bracelet, leaving the young man puzzled. Jin Ying was very confident in her abilities. She addressed everyone present and said that she was about to break the record. Zhang called the girl a joke, while Yan Hao watched with interest. He wanted to make sure she was really that strong. It was astonishing. It turned out that the red-haired beauty had a compatibility rating of 78%. The guys thought it couldn't be true. No one had ever recorded such a result before. Many thought the machine had malfunctioned and the girl didn't hold back her emotions, since she had broken Zhang Jin's record, just as she had said earlier. Zhang Jin was furious. Not only did he have to beat Yan Hao, but this red-haired girl had also pulled ahead. Yan Hao was the last to take the test. He realized that the girl was indeed very strong and might not be lying, and that she knew a lot. For the sake of information about his sister, Yan Hao had to win this contest, so he told everyone to watch closely. According to Captain Sun, Hao's combat rank was no lower than Class C. He looked at the beast core. It was the same as the one he had absorbed earlier. The guy inserted the core into the bracelet. He himself was very curious to find out what his compatibility was. The sensors immediately displayed Class C, and the other contenders stood there with their mouths agape. They realized that this was the level of a squad commander. But at that moment, the system malfunctioned. Compatibility with the core wasn't determined, and the computer displayed an error. Zhang Jin began to laugh maliciously, calling Hao a worthless blabbermouth who was just bragging but was incapable of anything himself. Even the beast core had rejected him. Yan Hao had no intention of responding to that freak's words. He himself didn't understand why the computer hadn't detected his compatibility. But suddenly his attention shifted to the bracelet, because Hao had begun absorbing the beast energy from the core. His body was doing it by force, without asking for permission. Jin Ying was absolutely thrilled. She had never encountered zero compatibility before. Even in the worst-case scenario, there had been at least 1%. The girl immediately sat down at the computer to investigate the problem. She knew she had to document such a remarkable result, figuring the old man would definitely be pleased. Zhang turned to the chief examiner and said that Yan Hao had stolen the beast core because it had disappeared from his hands. Instructor Lin demanded that the young man raise his hand and show him the bracelet and the core. Yan Hao was forced to show his wrist with the bracelet, but there was no core in it. The young man didn't understand what was happening himself, or at least that's what he told the chief examiner. Hao tried to come up with an excuse as quickly as possible, otherwise they would make him a guinea pig. Hao decided to take a risk and stage a beast-like transformation as a manifestation of the core's power. Yan Hao stood with his arm holding the bracelet raised high, supposedly mutated after reuniting with the beast core. Lin Yuxing ordered all the students to stay alert and move to a safe distance. Jin Ying was completely enthralled by this beast transformation and couldn't take her admiring eyes off Yan Hao. Everyone present reacted differently. Some decided he must be infected if he could transform like that, while the instructor thought he would have to use a firearm. Jin Ying turned to the young man and asked if he could hear her. The instructor was surprised when he heard perfectly normal human speech. He realized that the young man hadn't lost his mind as a result of the mutation. Yan Hao tried to play dumb. He said that it was probably the core's own ability. It had penetrated on its own, and then everything had changed. Jin Ying said it was nothing to worry about. It was a transformation ability, and while she'd never seen anyone like this before, it was truly amazing and a stroke of luck. The instructor wished the guy luck. It was the first time he'd seen self-regeneration occur after a beast transformation, and now Yan Hao looked completely normal. It was a rare anomaly. Hao didn't want to talk to anyone except the girl. He didn't understand where she knew so much from or who she really was. The chief examiner explained that Jin Ying was a candidate and also a research fellow at the Technical Intelligence Bureau. Her father was a major general who headed an entire department of scientific and technical development. Jin Ying was very upset that the instructor had revealed her secrets and that the aura of mystery had now vanished. After that, the examiner asked Yan Hao to return the beast core to him, because they needed to wrap up this charade. Hao sincerely apologized, saying he couldn't do that because the beast core had fused with his body and couldn't be removed. Zhang Jin was furious when he heard that the beast core was inside his body. The young man realized he needed to urgently report this information to the people from Green Vine because Yan Hao was the perfect test subject. After the examination, everyone was sent to the isolation ward for further study. Yan Hao was placed in an X-ray machine. Until then, no one had ever heard of a beast core growing inside a human body. Moreover, it seemed to have fused with his body. It was impossible to extract it. The director of the Technical Intelligence Department, Mr. Jin, along with his daughter and other staff members, carefully studied the results of the examination. The man believed that this young man needed to be investigated because he surely harbored many more secrets. The leadership of Fiery Blood arrived at the technical department's laboratory. They wanted to know the results of the examination to understand who this guy really was. Director Jin tried to steer the conversation by asking why Fiery Blood rejected candidates with compatibility below 40%. But Lieutenant General Sun Liang, the special unit's chief of staff, told him not to waste time and to explain immediately what was going on. They led him into the lab, and Director Jin explained that he had developed the testing device together with Greenvine, so it could be stated with certainty that this guy's compatibility was definitely not zero. Jin Ying could no longer contain herself and demanded that her father speak faster because she was dying of curiosity. Jin Ansheng suggested that the device had gone off the scale because Yan Hao's compatibility was unprecedented. It had exceeded the theoretical maximum by 100%. General Song listened to this information and left the lab, taking Examiner Lin with him. The crystalline core inside the young man was changing color from black to red. This was due to the absorption of a weak beast core. Previously, after absorbing the core of a Lord-level creature, Hao would master its abilities and activate his crystal core. But this time, after swallowing a low-level core, he didn't gain any abilities. Instead, his crystal core was strengthened. In other words, the stronger the creature, the more powerful Yan Hao becomes after devouring it. And if he doesn't stop devouring creatures, he will be able to evolve indefinitely. The Burning Blood Special Response Squad was stationed in a luxurious building. Song Rui didn't understand what complaints there could be against her, since she was the one who had found and brought Yan Hao into her squad. However, Commander Sun Lin, despite speaking to his daughter, demanded that she maintain the chain of command. He believed she was being too protective of this recruit, but the girl said she had already promised the young man she would take him into her unit, so her father shouldn't force her to break her word as a soldier. But Sun Lin was adamant. He said that a soldier's honor belongs to the state, not to an individual, and Yan Hao had already been assigned to Lin Youngsing's unit, and that could not be changed. The chief of staff believed that his daughter, even as a squad commander, should not take people away from Lin Youngsing. She would do better to focus on her own duties and not meddle in other matters. Sun Rui knew her father all too well. She didn't argue, but decided she would have to find another solution. Yan Hao was in the recreation room of the Burning Blood camp when he heard a loud scream. Jin Ying entered the room and reported that a new beast lair had been discovered between Lake City and Redstone City, and that Burning Blood recruits were being sent out on a reconnaissance mission. The girl had made arrangements with instructor Lin, and they had formed a team. Yan Hao was now a fighter in Lin Yuxing's squad from the Burning Blood Special Unit. Lin Yuxing instructed the fighters to scout the lair and assess the threat level, but to remain on high alert. Even though it was a low-level lair, anything could happen because of the red mist. Jin Ying was also a member of Lin Yuxing's squad, a senior researcher at the Technical Intelligence Bureau. Data collection was her forte. Several vehicles carrying military personnel set out on reconnaissance. The threat levels of beast lairs are classified as low, medium, high, and extremely high. The squad was now heading toward a lair classified as a hive type. It was characterized by a simple structure but complex internal passages. The most dangerous were the huge swarms of worker bees and a small number of fighter bees with sharp stingers. Just then, the driver noticed something strange ahead, slowed down, and tried to make out what was happening. Jin Ying added that the bees in this area weren't just ordinary, they were tough. Yan Hao looked out the window. High in the air, it seemed as if rocks were suspended above the forest. But upon closer inspection, it became clear that these were large bees, just as the girl had said, the iron bee species which cannot be compared to ordinary ones. The former patrolman, now a member of the special unit, immediately realized they needed to turn around and leave. The vehicle tried to drive away, but a hail of bee stingers, sharp as metal spears, flew toward it. Jin Ying knew the armored vehicle wouldn't withstand this attack. Hao decided to test his new abilities. He began tearing open the car door to fight the swarm. In the very next moment, the armored vehicle looked like a pincushion or a porcupine's back. Hao used the broken doors as cover, slightly altering them, and shouted to his comrades to take cover and defend themselves. The bees were useless against the modified doors. The young man could easily hide from their venomous stings. The driver didn't understand Hao's ability or how he was using the doors as a weapon. Jin Ying explained that it was a transformation. During the tests, Hao had absorbed the beast's core. The girl had thought at the time that Hao could only transform his own body, but it turned out he could apply this ability to objects. This meant the guy could turn anything into a weapon. Brilliant, Jin Ying decided to record this information for further study. Hao noticed strange green projectiles flying toward him. Powerful and capable of piercing shields, he needed to find the source. Finally, he discovered the source of the unknown attack and warned his comrades to take cover. Jin Ying and the driver took cover behind a rock and encountered a soldier with a flamethrower. The soldier knew that iron bees were afraid of fire and was about to roast them. However, in the next instant, a green sting struck his equipment, and the soldier exploded and burned to a crisp on the spot. It was tragic. Hao wanted the girl to find out what those green spikes were. Jin Ying studied the information and discovered that it was a hound queen. Her tail stinger contained a poison that corroded armor below C rank. It was strange that she belonged to the A rank hunter class, meaning the lair wasn't low level. Hao told his comrades to leave the worker bees alone, while he went to destroy the queen. Jin Ying was ready to fight. She was an elementalist with basic wind power. The girl created a powerful storm wind that prevented the bees from attacking, allowing Hao to leave the battlefield. He gradually made his way toward the spot where the queen appeared to be hiding. The young man reached the insect. It was enormous, with sharp claws and a long, poisonous stinger. Hao flattened the iron doors and twisted them into a spiral, turning them into a piercing weapon, something like an iron stinger. With this weapon, he could stand up to the bees, and with one sharp throw, he hurled the spear at the monster. The hit was precise. The metal arrow stuck out of the queen, yet she acted as if nothing had happened. Jin Ying couldn't understand how a hound-level monster could possess such strength, and an idea formed in her mind. The girl wanted to tell Hao not to let the queen fly away under any circumstances, otherwise she would soon reach the lord level. The young man was exhausted, his energy was depleted, and he couldn't move without replenishing it with a red mist. If he'd known about the queen, he would have saved some energy beforehand. Jin Ying advised him not to play dead, or else she'd have to give him CPR. Yan Hao got up, saying he wasn't interested in other people's children. It was clear he was feeling better. Jin Ying offered him a chocolate bar and advised him to rest a bit. The young man said he wasn't hungry, and his lack of energy wasn't due to food. At that moment, backup arrived. They needed to check on the young people, set up a temporary camp, and report the incident. After resting and regaining their strength, Hao and Jin Ying approached the location they had originally intended to investigate. The girl checked the air with a sensor. The concentration of red mist in the nest was within acceptable limits. They could enter in protective suits. The young people decided not to wait for reinforcements. The queen was wounded, and this was an excellent opportunity to gather data and finish her off. The threat level had risen to medium-high, and if the mission was successful, they would gain a host of advantages. A conversation was taking place in the Chief of Staff's office at the Special Forces headquarters. Song Lin said there was significant disagreement among the leadership. Some wanted to use Hao as a high-level combat force, while others wanted to use him as a test subject. The Chief of Staff ordered Lin Yongxin to keep the boy under constant surveillance, as he was too special. At that moment, a secretary rushed into the office and reported an urgent summons. So Lin Yongxin quickly left the Chief of Staff's office. He was informed that the threat level of the nest his subordinates were investigating was steadily rising from low to high. It turned out that Hao and Jin Ying had already entered it. The Chief of Staff knew that Jin Ying, though she appeared carefree, was actually very intelligent and calculating. She wouldn't take a risk for no reason, which meant there was a catch. The Chief of Staff gave the order to send the nearest Burning Blood fighters to provide support, as well as to deploy Captain Sun Rui's group immediately. It was necessary to ensure the safety of Jin Ying and Hao, as well as to destroy the nest. At that moment, Deputy Commander Yang Ji, who had already been discharged from the hospital, entered the office. The Chief of Staff said he would send the young man to join his daughter's team so they could all carry out the mission together. Song Ling ordered Lin Yongji to report immediately to Captain Song Rui and become her aide-de-camp. Both brothers suspected that it was the Chief of Staff who had made Lin Yongji his daughter's aide-de-camp the last time as well. However, the chief didn't want to offer any explanations. He didn't understand why his daughter was so worried about Yan Hao. and could only provide her with a reliable young man. Hao walked inside the nest thinking that as burning blood warriors, they possessed protective combat suits capable of containing the red mist. All that remained was to hope that everything would go smoothly. The girl constantly checked the energy readings, and they hardly changed. It was clear if the queen bee grew to the level of a lord, the difficulty of clearing the hive would increase dramatically. Hao suddenly signaled with his hand and ordered his friend to stop. The next moment, the cave wall burst open, and a huge, monstrous bee appeared before them. It was a mutated, iron-bellied queen with a poisonous stinger, even more dangerous than before. Judging by its size and tail mandibles, it had reached the lord level. Jin Ying realized she hadn't been mistaken in her assumptions. The queen had evolved, but it was inexplicable. The low concentration of red mist could in no way support her rapid strengthening. The other scout bees had also grown stronger. They too had increased in power and leveled up. The girl checked the sensors. The concentration had reached a critical level, yet the analyzer hadn't sounded an alarm. Suddenly, almost exhausted, she fell to her knees. The protective suits had also been damaged, and their effectiveness against the red mist had decreased. It became clear that there was a traitor in burning blood. Hao realized he wouldn't be able to fight and protect his girlfriend. He grabbed her hand and said they needed to retreat. Hao had just been complaining about the lack of red mist energy, and now it was coming to him on its own. The first priority was to take care of Jin Ying. The young man cleared out a small cave in the nest, dry and well ventilated, and left the girl there, telling her it was a safe place. He instructed Jin Ying to contact headquarters and request new protective suits. The girl said she could handle the task. She would update the data on the nest and relay all the latest information to headquarters. Hao was with the bees, and finally his girlfriend declared that if he didn't return, she wouldn't let him rest in peace even in hell. Yan Hao calmly and confidently said there was no need to worry, he would definitely return. The young man had already gained enough strength to protect those who mattered to him. This time, he made a promise, just as he had made to his sister. Hao estimated the number of opponents at the scout and lord levels and decided he would not suffer defeat. He prepared the dominant beetle's energy weapon. The remaining red energy was enough for a single shot, so he couldn't afford to fail. First, he needed to gather himself, concentrate, and get into the right mindset for the attack. After that, Hao created a crimson explosion and aimed it at the queen bee. There was a powerful explosion, then everything was shrouded in smoke. Hao didn't know if he'd succeeded. He noticed that red mist was gathering near his feet again. Everything around him was covered in red mist, from which monstrous bees glowed. There were so many of them. Jin Ying, sitting in cover, took apart the analyzer and confirmed that someone had damaged it. The girl repaired the device, and soon it was able to measure the concentration of the red mist normally. As soon as the device was turned on, it immediately began emitting danger signals. The concentration of the red mist exceeded the norm, with readings twice the limit value. At that moment, a powerful explosion, orchestrated by Yan Hao against the queen bee, rang out. The shockwave grazed the girl slightly. She realized where the explosion had come from, but because of the fog, it was impossible to explain it. By absorbing the red mist, the bees could evolve rapidly. Even the lowest-ranking scouts rose to the level of hounds. The fog was highly concentrated and dense, so the monsters were growing at an enormous rate. Hao didn't understand what was happening. The more he fought and destroyed the bees, the stronger they became. He felt that even with the red mist all around him, he couldn't replenish his energy fast enough. The queen bee attacked him with her poisonous sting. The boy realized he would soon be completely exhausted. Jin Ying saw that things weren't going according to plan and watched Hao, trying to figure out if he could handle it. The girl noticed Hao's neck. Symptoms of red mist infection had appeared, which meant his protective suit was damaged. The readings on the sensor kept rising. It was clear that the young man would soon lose control. The girl realized she had to intervene and quickly create a red mist around Yan Hao. She created an air cannon and aimed it deep into the beehive. Fresh air swirled in a spiral around Hao, preventing him from losing consciousness from the excess of red mist. When the air mass was near the young man, Jin Ying created a powerful explosion, which turned out perfectly. However, that was the problem. The red mist was gone, which meant Hao's energy source was completely cut off. The bees, without hesitation, attacked the young man with their poisonous stingers. He managed to raise a shield in front of him. Now his hands were covered in poison, which paralyzed his movements. Suddenly, a noise rang out behind him. Hao saw Adjutant Lin approaching him at tremendous speed. The next venomous sting pierced Adjutant Lin's back, but he possessed physical enhancement. Even after taking a sharp sting to the back, The young man didn't die. He said the battle was still on and they needed to focus. At that moment, several members of the support team triggered powerful electromagnetic blasts that destroyed the bees. Captain Sun Rui joined the battle with her weapon, just in time. Hao saw the girl and asked in surprise why she was there. It turned out that an order had come from headquarters to come to the aid of the Nest research team. After that, the conversation ceased, and it was time to focus on the battle. The captain ordered everyone present to destroy the creatures. Group A held the enemy at bay from the front, preventing them from advancing along the main route and showering everything with fire. Group B covered the mid-range. Adjutant Lin and Yan Hao were to retreat to the rear to rest. Everyone listened attentively to the captain and carried out her orders without question. At that moment, the Queen Bee prepared her stinger. The Queen Bee's speed was immense, and the soldiers didn't have time to react. The stinger was aimed at Hao's back. Captain Sun Rui ordered them not to turn around and to run as far away as possible. Since she was facing a ruler-level monster, the girl was forced to use a special technique. It was a first-stage electromagnetic attack. She created a high-voltage electromagnetic field and launched a targeted attack. The attack destroyed and paralyzed everything within its radius. Everyone saw that the captain's strike had hit the Queen Bee. However, it soon became clear the master-level Queen Bee wasn't dying. She was rising upward. Everyone hoped she wouldn't fly far away. But for now, they had to destroy the nearest swarm. Hao watched Captain Sun's actions and realized that she was indeed very powerful. Adjutant Lin noted that last time in the city of Chishi, the captain hadn't used her primary gear or worn a protective suit, so she hadn't been able to unleash her full power. The captain approached the men and asked Hao where Jin Ying was. At that moment, an enraged beauty emerged from the hideout and said that if the captain hadn't arrived in time, she would have found only her corpse. The girl replied that Jin Ying hadn't yet repaid her for the previous rescue. It became clear that the young people had a good relationship. All the wounded had been saved, and now they needed to destroy the swarm and eliminate the threat of the nest. Yan Hao decided to seize the opportunity and secretly replenish his supply of red mist energy. The young man absorbed the mist and thought that, since the previous shot from the red mist cannon had failed to suppress the Queen Bee, he needed to try again. Hao checked his status and confirmed that he had almost replenished his red mist energy reserves. But then a noise resembling a helicopter caught everyone's attention, even though it was coming from inside the hive. It turned out to be the Queen Bee, who had absorbed all the red mist around her. Energy gathered around the queen again, which meant she was about to evolve, and the monster had already reached the Lord level. The sensor showed that the red mist was about to break through. It was unclear where the energy was coming from. This nest was actually of a very high level. But trouble didn't come alone. A huge swarm of hound bees was approaching from the rear, and the soldiers were surrounded. Yan Hao shouted for his comrades to deal with the swarm while he took care of the queen, and leaped high into the air. Captain Sun immediately ordered everyone to attack the swarm and cover Yan Hao. Clumps of fog were gathering around the Queen Mother, and she was about to shift her form. At that moment, Yan Hao leaped toward her. He knew that if he didn't finish her off now, everyone would die. The young man dealt several blows to the Queen Bee. He gathered the red mist energy into a sphere once more and launched a crimson explosive concentration right next to the queen's head. A powerful blow and explosion engulfed everything around them in smoke. Hao leaped back to the ground and waited for the mist to clear, trying to figure out if he had succeeded. The young man was pierced by a sharp sting that came at him at tremendous speed. It became clear that the energy blast had not dealt a fatal blow to the queen. Yan Hao had managed to dodge and was unharmed, but he needed to create a suitable weapon. His gaze fell on the Queen Bee's stinger, which she herself had launched at him. Hao took the stinger in his hands and activated his beast transformation, saturating it with the energy of the red mist. The young man began to rise upward, holding the stinger like a sword and fending off the Queen Bee's attacks. He decided to envelop the queen with all the red mist energy he had left. Now, with such a powerful weapon in his hands, one the queen herself had given him, Hao decided to return the favor. Finally, the young man reached the bee, and with a single swing of his sword, cut the monstrous queen in half. A powerful explosion rang out and a red beast core fell from above. Yan Hao, of course, wouldn't mind possessing this Lord-level beast core. Yan Hao decided that he would take this beast core for himself. As soon as the young man took the core in his hands, he felt its strength and power. The core's energy instantly filled his crystal. Hao realized he couldn't hold on. He leaned on his sword, losing consciousness. The soldiers finally completely destroyed the swarm of bees. Everyone immediately sensed that the bees had suddenly weakened. Captain Sun Rui saw Hao in the distance, lying unconscious near his sword. The young man's heart was beating too fast, and his neural signals were completely disrupted. Jin Ying connected sensors to her comrade's body. It became clear that Hao had been exposed to the thick red fog and might now lose his mind. The captain gave the order to use the forward medical station to transport the patient. He absolutely had to be saved. The military rushed to the temporary camp located near the nest. Yan Hao was placed in a special chamber resembling a hyperbaric chamber or a coffin. Jin Ying had to set up the equipment inside the medical compartment. The girl activated the medical station and initiated the internal anesthesia, which now took effect on the person inside. Everyone knew this was only a temporary reprieve. He needed to return to headquarters immediately for treatment. Yan Hao felt as if he were bathing in a blood-red fog. He could feel his alter ego demanding that he surrender his body and assume his true beast form. Hao thought that his time had probably come, and that he was about to die, just like his family and loved ones. The young man lay in the barracks and realized that his end had come. He apologized to his parents for failing to save his sister. Yan Hao felt suffocating claws on his body, squeezing his throat, but at the same time, many people and voices believed that the young man would survive, that he would not give up after all. The battle was not yet over. He was a warrior, and his younger sister was waiting for him, and his parents had entrusted him with her care. Hao understood that everyone was waiting for him, but he saw before him the eyes of the monster that was also waiting for him. However, the young man decided that this was not the end, and that he would survive. Hao absolutely had to find Shui's sister and protect everyone from the monsters, so he simply couldn't die now. The young man turned to his alter ego and said that this was their shared responsibility. They had to return together because everyone was waiting and hoping for their help. Yan Hao felt terrible, but that was the price of becoming stronger. Every breakthrough to a new level was like dancing on the edge of a precipice. Yan Hao seemed to be feeling fine again, but for some reason he couldn't open his eyes, and his body wouldn't move. The military vehicles were racing toward the city, but they'd run into a sandstorm. The sandstorm was too strong, the road was completely obscured, and continuing on was extremely dangerous. 3 kilometers ahead lay the ruins of an old city. They could take shelter there and wait out the storm. The captain asked Jin Ying what the patient's vital signs were, and if they could stay a little longer. The girl checked and found that his vital signs had temporarily stabilized, but he had not regained consciousness yet. Captain Sun decided to drive into the ruins to wait out the sandstorm. It seemed that spending a little more time in a medical environment wouldn't be a big problem for Yan Hao's health. The vehicles drove into the ruined stadium. There was a roof, and the sandstorm didn't bother them there. However, as soon as she stepped outside, Captain Sun sensed danger. She ordered an immediate scan of the surrounding environment to check for concentrations of red mist and heat signatures. The captain said that protecting Hao was now the headquarters' top priority, so they had to be prepared for anything. At that very moment, there were indeed armed bandits in the ruins. Seizing the opportunity, they fired poisoned arrows at the soldiers, silently from crossbows. Everyone was ordered to take cover immediately, and he activated his hardening ability. Jin Ying immediately determined that the arrows were poisoned. Captain Sun ordered everyone to scatter in different directions to avoid the arrows. The girl activated her magnetic ability and created a field that blocked the attack, because a huge rock was flying toward the vehicle. The rock shattered into countless fragments, and Adjutant Lin covered Jin Ying by activating his hardening ability. Soon the soldiers found themselves surrounded on all sides by a large crowd. People were standing on every level of the abandoned stadium. The strangers threw bottles of flammable liquid at the soldiers, hoping to make their lives miserable. But it turned out that the bottles didn't contain flammable liquid, but something far worse. Inside was a liquid that, upon contact with air, turned into a gas that had a petrifying effect. The thugs were absolutely pleased with themselves and, fearing no resistance, were able to come down and emerge from their hiding places. A bald bandit with a huge axe was approaching Captain Sun. He found her attractive and wanted to have some fun with the girl. A powerful bolt of lightning paralyzed the scoundrel, after which Captain Sun kicked him in the chest. The blow was so powerful that the bald villain smashed through a rock and flew away. However, the girl could do nothing more. She had already inhaled too much gas, and her body was paralyzed. The bandits realized that the soldiers were transporting some valuable item. If they were risking their lives like this, it meant they were protecting that huge iron box. Jin Ying, with all her remaining strength, tried to stop the bandits, watching them flee in horror. But the girl had been shot in the leg and could only sit in a pool of her own blood, screaming as the bandits fled with the medical sphere on their shoulders. Yan Hao was still unconscious inside, but his vital signs were gradually returning. Perhaps the jostling had helped. The situation was dire. Not only had Captain Song failed to protect Yan Hao, the young man had been kidnapped, but Jin Ying had also been wounded. Jin Ying sat on the floor, her injured leg outstretched. she was trying to reason. After all, when they arrived here, the bandits had already set up an ambush, which meant they had somehow learned of the military's movements. Aide-de-camp Lin reported that the area had been cleared. Most of the bandits had taken advantage of the moment when the poison gas was deployed and fled. Outside, the sandstorm was still raging, which meant the bandits couldn't move on the ground. They had likely taken refuge in the basements. The soldiers found an abandoned elevator. Based on a preliminary check, this must be the bandits' old route to their hideout. Captain Sun gave the order to catch up with the bandits, engage them in battle, and bring Yan Hao back. In addition, someone had to stay near the vehicles and protect the wounded Jin Ying. The captain herself took her aide Lin and a group of soldiers with her. She ordered that they had no room for failure and must bring their comrade back. The driver begged to go with the captain, but she left him by the vehicles because the young man was from the rear guard, and the situation below was completely unknown. So it was better for him to stay and protect Jin Ying. But the young man wouldn't let it go, because Yan Hao was his friend. He had saved him once, and now Hao was in danger, so the driver couldn't just wait up top. Captain Sun agreed to take the driver with her, but demanded that he not fall behind her and follow from behind. Meanwhile, the gangsters had reached their base. They had dragged that heavy iron coffin there and now wanted to find out what was inside. Everyone assumed there must be something very valuable inside, since it was being transported in an armored vehicle. One of the gangsters, holding a huge axe, was about to break open the metal box. The man began chopping at the metal casing with the axe, but it had virtually no effect. After a while, the burglar didn't know what to do because the box turned out to be too sturdy. He managed to break a few iron bars, but the lid didn't budge a millimeter. Among the gang members was a teenage boy. He raised his hand and said he could open the box, but only from the bottom. The burglar told him not to talk nonsense, because there was nothing underneath. The three who had gone down there last time still hadn't returned. However, the boy insisted that he had seen a key down there that could open the metal box. The burglar lifted him up with one hand, showing him who he was. However, the boy wasn't scared. He proposed if he opened the box, the gangsters would let him go, and if not, let them kill him. Yan Hao had almost regained consciousness. He heard snippets of the conversation. The boy didn't remember what had happened to him after he lost control, but now he was most likely in the enemy's lair. After the core upgrade, Hao's senses had become significantly sharper. At that moment, the thugs were once again carrying the box in their arms. They were approaching some steps leading down into the dungeon. The hacker and the teenage boy were walking ahead. Yan Hao could now sense not only his surroundings and the underground environment, but also the state of his own body. It felt as if he were receiving readings, and now he possessed a venomous gland. This ability had likely been passed down to him from the queen bee. Soon the gang descended into the dungeon, where the bones of a huge dinosaur-like creature lay. It seemed to everyone that the boy was simply mocking them. But the boy said they needed to move the iron box to a specific spot. The others realized that nothing was going to happen right now. Suddenly, the box exploded in the gangsters' hands. More precisely, the lid flew high into the air, and the gangsters flew back in terror. Nothing was visible yet because everything was shrouded in smoke and dust. However, the box had opened, which meant the boy hadn't tricked them. The next moment, a man emerged from the box and struck the gangsters with a poisonous dagger. Their bodies were poisoned and there was nothing they could do. Hao was pleased with this ability. It was a rather useful ability that helped maintain control of the area. The gang leader was very disappointed. It turned out there was simply someone in the box, and there were no valuables inside. The bandit was furious. He believed the military had deliberately let them take the metal coffin to infiltrate their hideout. Hao didn't understand what nonsense this gangster was spouting, but the burglar said that he used to be a D-rank warrior and could crush this guy in a couple of seconds. The thug approached Hao and told him not to dare play dirty, or he'd die right then and there. Hao dodged the attack, activated his poison gland, and punched the burglar in the face. The former D-rank warrior flew backward across the dungeon and came to a stop, slamming into the wall. The poor kid, terrified, only managed to gasp. Hao looked at him and asked if the guy wanted to try his fist too. The boy had fainted from fear and now lay motionless on the ground. Yan Hao looked around. There were a huge number of unknown animals in this place. Hao picked up a bone and began examining it. There were visible injuries on the bones, suggesting these animals had died unnatural deaths. Someone had deliberately left them here to die, as if this were an arena for animal fights. Hao listened to the noise and recognized Captain Sun's electromagnetic sounds, which could be heard even 10 floors away. Hao thought of the girl and smiled. She was very hot-tempered and determined. A battle was raging in the gangsters' lair at that moment, because the military who had set out in search of Yan Hao had already arrived there. Lin used his hardening ability, and bullets and arrows bounced off him. The gangsters were stunned to see his body in such a state. Adjutant Lin was able to get right up close to the bandits and scattered them with kicks and punches. He reported to Captain Sun that the area had been completely cleared, but unfortunately there was no sign of the main find that had prompted this expedition. The captain ordered the search to continue. There were wild animal claw marks everywhere in the room. It seemed some kind of secret was hidden here. Finally, the soldiers approached the entrance to the underground passage. Using the detector Jin Ying had given them, they detected activity right beneath their feet. But suddenly the signal disappeared completely. The assistant suggested that the medical bay might be damaged, which meant Yan Hao was in danger. At that moment, Yan Hao appeared right beside them, safe and sound. He greeted his comrades who were still alive, and in his arms was the body of a young boy. Everyone was very surprised. They wanted to know what had happened down in the stone dungeon, and they were also worried about Yan Hao's health. Hao suggested that there appeared to be an abandoned beast arena inside. Adjutant Lin wanted to investigate the area. However, the captain said they wouldn't deal with that now. They needed to retreat, and the inspection would be organized later. Hao remembered that he was holding the boy in his arms. He set him on his feet, but the boy turned out to be very combative and immediately grabbed the knife hanging from his belt. Shouting, "Die!" the boy tried to stab Yan Hao in the chest, but Hao pushed him away with a light flick of his wrist. The knife snapped in two as it struck Hao's body because there was a localized animal mutation there, and his skin had the characteristics of scales. Hao was furious. Did this kid really want to die? Why was he acting this way? The boy continued to wheeze and curse, but his skin showed symptoms of red mist infection. It became clear that he had no control over his aggression. Yan Hao gave the boy a light slap on the back to knock the nonsense out of him, and the teenager fell flat on his back. Some kind of document fell out of his pocket. The driver picked up the document. It belonged to a soldier from the 7th Squad's patrol team. The driver realized it was his comrade's ID. Captain Sun looked at the ID. The man in the photo was much older than this teenager, but they still looked very much alike. Perhaps they were brothers. The boy was in very poor condition, so the soldiers decided to take him for treatment first. His infection was still in its early stages. Yan Hao knew that if he could draw out the energy of the red mist, the boy could be saved. He placed his hand on the teenager's back and began to treat him. In the special operational combat zone of Hukan City, everything was sealed off from external enemies. They needed to report to Mr. Zhang that they had returned. A soldier set out to carry out the order. Captain Sun ordered her deputy to immediately take Jin Ying to the medical station and have her injured leg treated. Adjutant Lin supported the girl, who couldn't stand on her own, and was ready to carry out the captain's order. But the soldiers couldn't go anywhere. They were told that due to the latest epidemiological safety regulations, everyone arriving from a high-risk zone of contact with the red mist must undergo an immediate examination. There had been no such rule before, and the guys from the Burning Blood group didn't understand why they had to do this. But now it was an order from above. They had to take off their clothes and undergo a full disinfection and inspection because they simply wouldn't be allowed to proceed any further. Captain Sun Rui identified herself and said she wanted to know who had given such an order, demanding that the local base commanders report here immediately. In the midst of these arguments, the local chief came out onto the street to find out who was refusing to undergo the inspection. The young man learned that it was Captain Sun and her team. He immediately began to say that a mistake had been made, but the young man didn't understand why Sun Rui had returned with Yan Hao. The captain wanted to know who had given the order for the inspection. Zhang Jing said that she and Jin Ying didn't need to undergo the inspection because they were veterans of the unit. But the soldiers who had recently joined the special unit had to cooperate and undergo screening for the sake of the camp's security. Sun Rui was furious. She didn't understand why this brat was giving orders. He had no right to make decisions on his own. After that, the captain ordered her men to ignore Zhang Jing and follow her. At the last moment, he called out to the group and asked if they were going to bring that ragamuffin into the camp. The soldier said that he wasn't a ragamuffin, but the younger brother of his comrade in arms. This man was clearly neither a soldier nor a member of the patrol. Therefore, in Zhang's opinion, this trash should be thrown in the garbage. And now Zhang Jing had sent 2 of his soldiers who were going to take the boy away or examine him. Hao could barely contain his rage. He activated the poisonous vine and decided to speak with the local commander, Zhang Jing. Hao approached him and touched his shoulder, asking him not to touch the boy. Zhang immediately felt excruciating pain in his body. He realized he had been poisoned, but couldn't figure out when or how it had happened. Hao explained to Zhang that his methods were too underhanded and that he was mocking them, so he should stop before it was too late. Hao looked at his rival, his hands in his pockets. He couldn't understand what had happened to Commander Zhang, just a few words, and he'd already passed out. The soldiers didn't understand what had happened either, since they'd seen it all with their own eyes. But it seemed Commander Zhang really wasn't feeling well and needed to be taken away to rest. The frightened soldiers rushed to help their commander. Zhang Jing once again felt just how much he hated that insolent Yan Hao. Song Rui quietly asked Hao what exactly he had managed to do, but the guy said there was no need to worry. Zhang would rest for a couple of days and be fine. When the team finally returned to headquarters, an emergency meeting was underway in the medical lab. Jin Ying explained that a chemical had been applied to her combat suit, which had disabled its protective functions upon contact with the red mist. Everyone understood that they hadn't intended to kill the girl. They just needed to neutralize her temporarily. Everyone understood that they hadn't intended to kill. Chief of Staff Sun Ling announced that until the circumstances were clarified, both were temporarily suspended from external assignments. Jin Unsheng addressed the Chief of Staff, saying that there were moles within the headquarters, so they needed to find trustworthy people to protect his daughter and Yan Hao. The traitor's next attack might succeed. Of course, the Chief of Staff understood this and promised to do everything possible. Sun Ling could trust no one more than his own daughter, so he assigned her unit to ensure the safety of Hao and Jin Ying. A few days later, Yan Hao sat on a bench idly, analyzing the current situation. Field assignments were off the table for him for the time being because there were traitors in the army. On top of that, he had another run-in with a representative of the Zhang family. Just then, one of the soldiers ran up to him with some shocking news. The guy explained that the military had been reviewing photos of the teenager and had found a girl in one of them who looked very much like Yan Hao's sister. The men rushed to the hospital where the teenager had been all this time. His condition had stabilized, but he still needed to be monitored. When the boy was brought in, the infection was very serious, but over the past couple of days it had practically disappeared, and this remained a complete mystery to the doctor. At that moment, Hao said he would conduct a blood test and asked not to be interrupted. The doctor was shocked by such methods. He stood there with his mouth agape. It was clear that this teenager was a robber and a thug, but now his infection symptoms were subsiding. Hao was almost calm. He knew he had already eliminated the red mist from the boy, and now Hao was looking at the photos. The photos showed various people, and a girl who looked very much like Shui was bandaging a young man's leg. Just then, the boy came to and started shouting for his photo to be put there instead of his brother's. Hao pointed to the girl and asked if the boy knew her. The boy began to explain that 6 months ago he had been in a refugee camp. That's where they had met, and the photo had been taken. The boy didn't know where exactly this stranger might be now, and he didn't remember anything else at all. Suddenly, the teenager started having a tantrum. He screamed that he hadn't seen anyone, not even his brother. His brother had told him to wait for him in the city and promised he'd be back soon. Hao thought that these were the same words he had once said to his sister, promising to definitely return and meet her. The soldier explained that a soldier named Ashu, the teenager's older brother, had been sent to transport refugees, but along the way he was assigned a different task. After that, he disappeared. Hao wanted to know exactly what mission he had been given and why he had disappeared. He needed to examine the archives of those missions to find out. Hao felt very sorry for the boy. He placed his hand on the child's body and began to draw the red mist out of him. The soldier was very surprised by what he saw. However, Hao asked him not to tell anyone and to pretend that nothing had happened. When the boy came to his senses, Yan Hao said he would help him find his brother. But first, the teenager had to tell him everything he knew about himself and the girl in the photo from 6 months ago. The teenager asked again, if he told everything about the girl, would Yan Hao help him find his brother? Hao confirmed that he would definitely keep that promise. The boy also wanted to know exactly what Hao had just done to him, after which he felt better. But not getting an answer, the teenager agreed not to pry where he shouldn't, and began his story about what had happened at the refugee camp 6 months ago. After that, the boy was sent to the dining hall to have lunch and plan their next steps. Yan Hao wanted to return to the city of Kishi because his sister had gone missing more than 6 months ago, and he couldn't wait any longer. The soldier admitted he didn't know what to do about Captain Sun. She had told him there was a traitor in the army who wanted to harm Hao, and now the boy was watching over his friend, trying to prevent his death. Hao listened to all this but said that everything he was doing was to find his sister, and he wouldn't let anyone stop him. Suddenly, Captain Sun's voice rang out from behind him, asking who exactly was getting in his way. Jing Ying greeted the guys, saying she was feeling much better. She had received top-notch treatment, and Captain Sun suggested they move to another place where they could talk comfortably. The girls said they were already aware of everything that had happened. Hao wanted to know who the traitor was, but this time it turned out there were no traitors. The cameras were just working well. Of course, one could take offense at the fact that personnel were being monitored inside the camp, but it was all for the sake of order and everyone's safety. Everyone was concerned about the situation with a traitor within the army. While internal problems had been identified, external threats could not be ignored either. The captain admitted that she was the one who asked Jin Ying to check the cameras. After that, the doctor came to see her and told her about new treatment methods. Song Rui said she had no intention of interfering with Yan Hao. On the contrary, she promised to help him, so she hoped he would trust her. Yan Hao didn't have time to reply. Most likely he wanted to say that he could handle it on his own. At that moment, Jing Ying clung to him. She was happy to be investigating something again because she had her own methods, and she was the best at them. The nameless soldier announced that he too would always support his best friend, and that he could definitely be counted on. After everyone had expressed their support, the captain asked what exactly Hao planned to do next. The ruined suburbs of Kishi looked desolate. They were completely deserted. The young man approached the entrance. He was asked for the password. He replied that there was nothing, and that turned out to be the password. Zhang Shi told the man that he needed to see Hong immediately. He was referring to Yan Hao, who was on his way to their city at that very moment. The man immediately called Mr. Hong and reported that information had come in about Yan Hao. A few days later, there were many armed men at the checkpoint on the outskirts of Kishi. They were stopping cars and inspecting all vehicles entering the city. The armed men claimed this was an order for the city's defense. They demanded that people roll down their car windows, show their faces, state their names, and report where they were going. There had never been such activity in this area before. These soldiers were causing chaos under the guise of active defense. Hao praised the cool car that Sun Rui was driving. The girl said that they weren't out on military missions, so they couldn't use military vehicles. A personal vehicle would be less conspicuous. Song Rui reported that she had instructed her aide, Lin, to personally keep an eye on Jing Ying, so the girl should be fine. Jing Ying promised to help in her own way. She could do this effectively from headquarters, which is why they left her there. Additionally, she would be able to support the group remotely via military communications. At that moment, a soldier approached the car and informed them that they were being inspected. Another guard, standing on the roof of a building, reported that an anomalous creature had attacked nearby. And indeed, a pack of iron wolves was running through the city streets. They were heading straight for us. The brave soldiers took off running, with no intention of engaging them in battle. Captain Sun was outraged. Those idiots had abandoned the people to their fate. Yan Hao got out of the car and said he would deal with these wolves. The unfortunate civilians tried to flee from the monstrous wolves. However, the monsters pursued them and began tearing them apart on the spot. Yan Hao leaped between the pack of wolves and the people and killed a couple of the beasts with his bare hands. Hao shouted at the man that if he wanted to live, he'd better run. The iron wolves stared at the man, preparing to tear him to pieces. Yan Hao raised his brutal hand and thought about how what was happening wouldn't repeat itself over and over again. Memories flashed through his mind of how a pack of iron wolves just like this one had torn him away from his family forever, killed his parents, and left him in perpetual solitude. But now everything was different. Yan Hao knew for certain that he would not let the events of the past repeat themselves. The stranger stared in horror at the young man, who was no weaker than the monsters, because he personally destroyed the anomalous creatures with his own hands in a matter of moments. The soldiers realized who this man was, and immediately decided to warn Captain Zhang that the target had already arrived in Kishi City. Hao had indeed taken down an entire pack of wolves, and his friends praised their comrade. It was no wonder he was a fighter with boiling blood. Captain Sun said she would handle the rest herself. The young woman introduced herself to the soldiers, stating that she was the captain of a special forces unit and ordered them to immediately stop the checks and let the civilians into the city. The soldiers didn't argue with her, and soon our friends, along with the rest of the civilians, were able to drive inside. However, it didn't take a genius to figure out the real reason behind the recent security checks. These guards were simply looking for someone, but for Hao and his friends, the top priority was to investigate Ash's case. The young people arrived at the City Defense Unit's headquarters and were taken to the archives, where all the patrol team's files were kept. They spent quite a bit of time in the archives. Unfortunately, though, Ash's file was nowhere to be found, even though the main information was intact and safe. Sun Rui spent a great deal of time sifting through all the digitized information in the archives, but her search proved fruitless. The nameless soldier couldn't find anything about Unit 7 or about some of the soldiers he knew personally. Even the basic rosters had vanished. Sun Rui confirmed that the entire local database had been destroyed. There were no records of Aisha. It seemed this trip had been in vain, and there was no other option left but one. The captain called Jing Ying and asked her to check something. Everyone agreed that their red-haired assistant was really cool. Her name was all hearing, and Jingying promised to find the data in the database, but it would take some time. The nameless soldier remembered that Captain Jia had once been in the government army when the patrol team was just being formed, and Captain Jia had commanded Aishu. He must know about those events. It was decided to go straight to the captain's home, since he hadn't yet returned to duty after his injury. However, it turned out that the captain's entire apartment had been ransacked. The dishes were smashed, and there were fresh signs of a struggle. Examining the scene of the tragedy, everyone realized that it was almost certainly the work of members of the city defense unit. Captain Sun couldn't understand why they would beat and kidnap a man, but a memory surfaced of when Hao had punished Captain Zhang, who had been bullying the wounded Jia. Most likely, this was their revenge. Now almost no one doubted that the purpose of the checkpoint at the city entrance was to find Yan Hao and make sure he had arrived, which meant they needed to go upstairs and sort things out there. The young people went out to the street to their car, but several vehicles with military personnel were already waiting for them there, and they were delighted to meet Captain Sun Rui. Li Qi, the deputy head of the city defense unit, was very happy to see the girl. He had received a message that she had arrived in Qixi. Li Qi got straight to the point. The captain of his patrol had gone missing while on a mission outside the city, and now Li Qi was asking the girl to help in the search. Captain Sun didn't understand why he was turning to her, but the man replied that recently anomalous creatures around Qixi City had been very active, and a regular patrol squad wasn't capable of fighting them. Hao and Rui exchanged knowing glances. They could communicate perfectly well with each other without words. Captain Sun confirmed that she was ready to help with the search, but Li Qi had to work alongside them. But the man said that was going too far. He feared that joint operations would draw the attention of their superiors. The response was extremely strange. Captain Sun couldn't believe her ears. She tried to intimidate the man, saying it was an order, and that she could accuse Li Qi of insubordination and even have him shot, but he still tried to refuse. However, he was still forced into the car, and now they were trying to figure out what was really going on there. If anomalous creatures were active around the city, then why had Captain Jia gone on the mission? Hao speculated that the city leadership had deliberately sent Captain Jia, perhaps to his death. Li Qi tried to save face, saying that nothing of the sort had happened. Soon the group arrived at their destination. Stepping out and looking around, Hao was surprised and wary. If anomalies were active in the area, it was very strange because he hadn't sensed any red mist at all. Li Qi checked something on his phone and said they needed to leave the area immediately. He added that he had fulfilled his part of the agreement and brought the group to the scene they could manage without him from here on out, and he had already called for soldiers to pick him up. After that, Li Qi asked to tell Captain Sun that the search was now her responsibility, and he was leaving. However, Captain Sun disagreed and blocked the man's path, saying he wasn't going anywhere. She then demanded to know exactly what the objective was and what was going on here. Suddenly, the sky above the city darkened and was filled with flashes of lightning. They were very powerful. Everything around was illuminated by the light. Li Qi shouted that it was too late and he was leaving. It was unclear exactly who he was referring to. The next moment, it seemed as though all the lightning bolts were converging on a single spot, which was illuminated by a flash. Li Qi began to sob that he didn't want to die because he was still too young. And soon our friends realized why there were no low-level anomalies around. Even monsters feared the creature that now appeared before the people. It was a thunder beast of the initial rank. One glance at this creature was enough to realize that the monster was at the Lord level. Everyone understood that the unusual activity of the monsters, the disappearance of the patrol squad during the operation, all of this was no mere coincidence. Li Qi took advantage of the fact that everyone was staring at the thunder beast and, screaming in fear, threw himself at the iron. Captain Sun gave the order to capture the coward and not let him escape. An unnamed soldier gave chase, but Li Qi was certain they wouldn't catch him, because he had no intention of just dying in this hellhole. At that moment, the thunder beast opened its jaws. It was clear that it had been building up energy until that very moment and was now ready to unleash its breath. They had to dodge this breath immediately. Hao and Song barely managed to do so. Hao realized that getting out of this place would be no easy task. Sun Rui told the young man to hold his ground while she went to get a weapon. At that moment, a man was watching the events unfold from the roof of one of the buildings. It was Zhang Shi, the commander of the city garrison. He looked pleased and wanted to see how his enemy, Yan Hao, would get out of this situation. His assistant stared in amazement at the beast's core, encased in a capsule. He couldn't believe that such a tiny device could control a Lord-level monster. The captain confirmed that this was indeed the case, because the technology behind this process was beyond the wildest imagination of ordinary people, and the developers had already established an entire facility for taming monsters. They kept creatures there that were on a completely different level from anything ordinary people had ever seen. Captain Zhang told his assistant that as soon as they delivered Yan Hao to the client, the city of Kishi would immediately belong to him. Meanwhile, Hao was trying to fight the Storm Beast, a monster with elemental abilities that harnessed energy in battle. Hao attacked, hoping that the venom he had obtained from the Queen Bee would work even on a Lord-level creature. He tried to get close to the monster, but was repelled by a barrier created around the creature. Hao took another opportunity and confirmed that his transformation into a beast had been forcibly cancelled. It seemed that the Thunder Beast was surrounded by the same kind of electromagnetic neutralizing grenade that Captain Sun Jue used. At that moment, the Thunder Beast began gathering an electrical charge in its paw. It hurled this electric blast at the man. The guy managed to jump out of the way, but it took a great deal of effort. Hao knew it would be difficult, and he couldn't lose his focus. Just as he'd suspected, this monster was different from ordinary Lord-level beasts. Unfortunately, Yan Hao's body was entangled in lightning, and he couldn't get close. But the young man held out hope. If he could destroy the protective layer of lightning, everything would work out. The captain hoped she would succeed because her beast core had been bestowed by the lightning beast, and the lightning beast was capable of neutralizing surrounding particles with its electricity, rendering others' abilities useless. The girl was certain that if she fired a neutralizing grenade at full power, it would temporarily neutralize the beast's lightning armor. The effect would last only a short while, and the armor would regenerate. But that was enough for Hao. He only needed a split second to attack. The boy stepped forward to face the Thunder Beast. Once he was close enough, he shouted to his friend to attack the beast. Sun Rui fired an electromagnetic neutralizing grenade from her weapon. In the very next instant, the beast's lightning armor was destroyed, leaving it vulnerable to various attacks. At that very moment, the young man activated his beast form. His poison-soaked claws inflicted several cuts on the huge monster's body. He wanted to see how the Queen Bee's poison would work. And it did indeed work. The Thunder Beast's movements slowed down. The monster attacked the young man, but it was too slow for Hao, and he easily dodged the attack. After that, he launched a counterattack against the monster, which was now practically defenseless. Hao noted with surprise that although this monster's attack power was higher than that of the previous lords, without its lightning power, its body was much weaker. However, one must not forget that all of this was thanks to Sun Rui's neutralizing grenade. Hao realized he needed to act even more forcefully to achieve his goals. The young man noticed that the beast was trying to flee the battlefield. Hao didn't want to let this beast go. He needed to get to the beast's core. After all, he hadn't been fighting for nothing. The bandits watched what was happening, and the young man was getting nervous. The monster was about to lose. And why wasn't Captain Zhang doing anything? Sun Rui noticed that Hao had grown significantly and become much more powerful recently. The girl decided that she too needed to increase her power. Captain Zhang replied to his assistant that he shouldn't assume he had come today with only one Lord-level monster. Captain Sun turned around, and her eyes bulged in horror as the enormous, tooth-filled maw of yet another monster opened before her. This gigantic creature had crept up from behind completely silently and was now preparing to devour the captain. Yan Hao reacted with lightning speed. He flung the girl aside and clamped his hand over the monster's jaws, preventing it from swallowing Captain Sun. The huge beast looked angry, as if it had swallowed something sour, though in reality it was Hao who was in its jaws. It was clear that the monster was feeling unwell. It stood still and shook its head. Yan Hao used his hands to pry open its jaws, because even if the monster had swallowed the boy, that didn't mean it could swallow him whole. Eventually, the unfortunate monster spat out the object that was causing it pain in its mouth. Hao thought that the appearance of two lords in the same place was no coincidence. Moreover, it turned out to be a stealthy Lord-level monster. It specialized in enhanced camouflage and could launch a surprise attack by approaching its victim completely unnoticed. Captain Sun knew that without an assistant with high sensitivity, dealing with such a monster would be very difficult. The young people were expecting the stealthy monster to appear from one side, but it had already appeared from a completely different direction and was now attacking them. On top of that, the Thunder Beast had recovered and could use lightning. Hao had no beastly nature within him, and all of this was extremely dangerous. There were only two warriors against two lords. The stealth beast crept up unnoticed and attacked Hao. The blow was very powerful, and the boy was sent flying, unable to resist or defend himself. Sun Rui gathered an electromagnetic charge in her hand to attack the hidden beast while it was still visible. The electromagnetic explosive grenade hit its target precisely, and a powerful explosion rang out. The lightning bolts paralyzed the hiding creature. It stood frozen in place, unable to do anything. But in the next instant, the creature vanished, dissolving into thin air. Hao confirmed that this beast had extremely high stealth, making it very difficult to detect with sensors. Sun Rui was able to track its movement via the magnetic field because it had been hit by her electromagnetic grenade. Hao prepared to attack. He immediately said he would deliver a fatal blow as soon as he pinpointed the beast's location. The captain checked the magnetic field and detected the monster to the left behind Hao. The young man stood motionless, showing no sign that he sensed the animal's approach, while the girl corrected the monster's location, reporting that it was to the right rear. Hao waited a few more moments, then spun around sharply and grabbed the monster by the jaws, preventing it from closing its throat. After that, the young man directed a burst of red mist into the hiding beast so that it might taste this poison. The beast's head soon exploded from the inside because it was unable to spit out the red mist. The young people stood near the body of the enormous Lord-level monster they had defeated. They weren't going to leave until they dealt with the storm beast. Hao asked if the captain could fire another electromagnetic grenade to remove the monster's protective barrier. Unfortunately, the girl admitted that she didn't have enough energy left to do it again. However, the captain believed there was another way to pierce the monster's lightning armor. The girl transferred her remaining energy to Hao, preparing to form a time sphere. It would last very little, about 10 seconds. Even for us, Vera, that would only withstand a single attack. But that should be enough to strike back at the monster. There was only one chance. The young man tried to maneuver closer. He couldn't be hit before closing in on the monster. Hao concentrated all his strength in his right hand and delivered a powerful blow to the Lord despite the monster attacking him with lightning. Captain Zhang couldn't believe his eyes. Had he really lost? After all, there were two lords, and even stronger fighters wouldn't have been able to handle them, let alone these weaklings. The captain was furious he was leaving, having given the order to launch anti-tank missiles, and stopping this pair was out of the question. He couldn't let them get away. Yan Hao was exhausted, yet satisfied because he had finally defeated the Thunder Beast. That was the end of the battle. Now he held two beast cores in his hands, one containing electricity from the lightning beast, the other from the stealth beast. This time Captain Sun had worked very hard, and half of the trophies belonged to her. Hao approached the girl. However, she lay motionless, showing no signs of life. Just then, the nameless soldier returned, dragging Li Qi behind him, who also didn't want to die. Sun Rui was in principle fine. She was simply exhausted from overusing her ability. It was just exhaustion, with no signs of the red mist. Meanwhile, on the roof of the building, the military was preparing to launch anti-tank missiles, but suddenly noticed that the deputy head of the defense unit was also among the enemies. The soldiers fired the missiles, and now the explosions were happening right next to the people. Li Qi screamed in fear, blaming Captain Zhang Shi for everything. The man decided he would no longer cover for his superior. He explained that it had all been Captain Zhang's order. They had to capture Yan Hao, and then money and promotions would pour in, and they would live like kings. Zhang Shi watched from the roof and couldn't understand why not a single shot fired by his subordinates had hit its mark. The soldiers surmised that due to the recent attack by the lightning beast, accompanied by powerful electrical discharges, the surrounding electromagnetic field had been completely disrupted, making it impossible to aim properly. Suddenly, the attack stopped. Hao ordered his comrade to take Captain Sun into the city, contact Jingying, and report on the mutiny and attack organized by Captain Zhang Shi. It was also necessary to remove Li Qi, the deputy head of city defense, from this location so he could be properly interrogated. It was also essential to ensure that information about this reached the chief of staff of the special forces, Sun Lin. The young man carried out all the orders. He hoped that Hao would get in the car too, but that wasn't an option. Hao wanted to protect his friends. After all, if he got in the car, they would become targets again, so Hao intended to stay behind to cover them. Just at that moment, an anti-tank missile flew in. Hao jumped up and kicked it away, stunning everyone present. The soldiers fired several more missiles at him, but he successfully deflected them all. When it became clear that Hao was closing in on the enemies, Captain Zhang ordered his men to block his path, because Luton's men would be arriving soon. But these men could do nothing against Yan Hao's power. It seemed as though he had simply flown past them like the wind, yet they were all already dead. Zhang Shi tried to flee, unable to comprehend how this man had killed two lords and was still standing. However, a powerful blow stopped him. Hao used his beast form, claws, and powerful arm to pin the captain down. Hao tightened his grip on the traitor's throat and said he was very glad to see the captain safe and sound, but that he, the fool, had gotten involved with the wrong people. However, something strange happened next. A powerful blow to the head sent Yan Hao flying to the side. And to his surprise, the young man was unable to anticipate or dodge the attack. Hao saw a stranger. It was Lufin from Luton's group, a Class B warrior. Captain Zhang was happy that his master had arrived in time to save him. Hao didn't know who was standing before him, but the stranger replied that the young man didn't need to know that at all. Hao blinked, and there was no one in front of him anymore. But in the next instant, the stranger delivered a powerful blow, though Hao managed to put up his defense. And so a fight broke out between the opponents. It was unclear which of them was stronger, because the young man parried all of Lufin's attacks quite effectively. But Lufin still managed to break through Hao's defense, saying that the boy was still too weak. Yan Hao was sent flying to the far end of the arena, and after that, everything around him was engulfed in flames, followed by a powerful explosion. Hao showed no signs of life, and a conversation took place above him. Lufin believed that he had been summoned by some pathetic little people from the sewers. The warrior had sent 2 lords, and for some reason, they had lost to this weakling. Lufin said he had no more business here and was returning to his own place. Captain Zhang Shi promised to take care of everything else, saying he wouldn't let them down again. The man kicked Hao, adding that Yan was now like a dead, useless dog. Zhang made a phone call and demanded a video call with Captain Jia Jun. Captain Jia was sitting in a cell at the time when the guards woke him up and told him to look at the phone because Captain Zhang was going to show him something. Zhang held Hao by the hair and greeted Captain Jia, ostensibly demonstrating what he had done to Yan Hao. Jia Jun was furious. He didn't understand why Zhang had let things get this far and why he had treated a completely innocent man this way. Zhang said over the phone that he hated Hao and wanted him to come to a bad end. After that, the man ordered the second team to take Hao away and transfer him to the taming base. By this time, Hao had already regained consciousness. He realized that Commander Jiao was nearby and decided, first and foremost, to quietly consume the beast stone of the vanishing beast. The Luton faction's base was located in the city of Chishi at a depth of about 300 meters. Yan Hao was restrained with chains and handcuffs and was inside some kind of container in an unknown laboratory. Soon the young man woke up because the absorption of the Lord-level stealth beast's core had been completed. Now the young man possessed shadow camouflage. He could remain in a state of stealth for several minutes, and in this state his movement speed increased. Yan Hao calmly moved his hand and directed it toward the glass of the capsule he was in. The capsule immediately shattered into tiny fragments, and the liquid spilled out. Hao looked around with interest. He was surprised that such a strange place was hidden outside the city. At that moment, the people noticed that the test subject had escaped. One of the researchers ordered that security be notified immediately. Yan Hao, for it was he, reached out toward the surveillance camera, and the signal was lost. Security received orders from management. Capture the test subject. They had to prepare powerful doses of sedatives and special nets for catching monsters. The elevator door opened, and Hao activated his invisibility ability. The guards looked on in surprise, unable to find the subject, and didn't understand what was happening. Hao used Shadow Step while the guards were trying to find him. The guards were very upset because it had taken a tremendous amount of effort to capture this specimen, and now he had simply vanished. If they didn't find him, it would be the end for everyone. Yan Hao was very pleased with his new ability. He wouldn't be able to maintain this form for very long, so he needed to find Captain Jia as soon as possible. The guards heard the commotion and became curious about what was happening outside. They were informed that a test subject had escaped, but that wasn't their concern because they were only responsible for capturing and detaining the necessary subjects. If the lab guards couldn't hold on to a test subject, let them deal with the consequences themselves. The guards couldn't say anything else, because that was the end of their lives. Yan Hao pushed the thick bars of the cage apart with both hands, and Captain Jia was surprised to see and recognize Hao. Hao was very pleased. He knew he wasn't easy to defeat. The young man replied that it was all thanks to the good training Captain Jia had given him. The captain felt unwell. He drank water greedily, and Hao explained that he had been looking for him because of Private Ashu's disappearance. But now it seemed the captain himself was in trouble. Hao wanted to know if the captain had found anything related to the disappearance of Ash's group. Perhaps some traces or clues. Jia Jun admitted that everything was much more complicated than it seemed. He had been trying to find the guy for a long time, but there was nothing. At the time, the patrol was just being formed, but soon the city defense unit began taking guys from the patrol under various pretexts and special assignments. And after that, they vanished without a trace. No one offered any explanations, just kept insisting that they had gone missing on missions. This story was much deeper than it seemed at first glance. The city defense unit didn't have enough influence over all this, which meant someone powerful was behind it. We need to catch Captain Zhang Shi, and then we'll be able to find out the whole truth. Just then, the elevator door swung open, and armed guards appeared. Captain Jia told the guy he didn't need to get any deeper into this. He'd handle it himself. Hao knocked out all the guards with a single kick. He said that if he ran away now, his entire plan to capture them would go up in smoke. To put it mildly, Captain Jia was surprised and stunned. Hao asked if the man could move, but he already looked almost back to normal. Zhang Shi gave the order to release all the creatures, otherwise they wouldn't be able to hold Yan Hao. But they replied that the captain had no authority to give orders here. But Zhang Shi shouted that he didn't care about authority. If the commander wasn't here, everyone had to listen to him. If Yan Hao broke through now, they were all doomed. Hao and the captain, but suddenly the young man heard something and signaled to stop. Ahead down the corridor, a group of all manner of monsters of various kinds and varieties was approaching. Hao shouted at the captain to hide as far away as possible and realized that monsters were being bred in this place. This was a crime against humanity. Most likely, the two lords had also been released from the laboratory. Hao activated his beast form, claws, and sliced through all the monsters. These animals couldn't stop him. Captain Zhang Shi watched the fleeing medic and shouted that if he hadn't caused all this commotion, they wouldn't have had time to destroy the data. Zhang was sure that Hao wouldn't make it because there were so many monsters here. But in the very next moment, something struck the captain powerfully in the back. Several walls were swept away by the impact, and Yan Hao's silhouette appeared in the passageway. The vehicles carrying the researchers sped away, saying they no longer needed the captain. A massive explosion set off by the fleeing researchers rang out, and Captain Zhang realized they had decided to get rid of him like a piece of trash. Zhang told Hao not to come near him because he had Captain Jia in his hands. But in the very next moment, Hao lifted the burly man onto his arm and asked who was behind all this and what kind of place this was anyway. Zhang Shi realized he had lost. Hao had already found and freed Captain Jia. So the villain began to tell everything he knew and confessed that a certain Mr. Hong was behind it all. He demanded that Zhang hand Yan Hao over to him, promising endless wealth and power in return. They were in one of the branches where they mainly conducted exchange operations and bred monsters. Hao realized that the villains were constantly watching him and even knew that he was going to check the patrol squad's archives, having set everything up in advance. Zhang Shi claimed he knew nothing about the archives. It was just a coincidence. But he knew where those who disappeared from the patrol squad were sent, and Mr. Hong himself might be there. Zhang begged for his life and promised to personally show them the right place. The captain led them to a hatch that could take them outside since the main tunnel had been blown up. Zhang knew there was a secret passage below, and they would most likely be able to escape through it. A foul, stinking odor hung in the air below. Hao didn't understand how or why this passage had been made. Zhang hoped to find the right moment to break away and as a last resort to lure Hao to Luteng and hand him over. Yan Hao soon felt a strange pressure. He looked around, not understanding what was causing this pressure. The others felt nothing, but Hao possessed an animal instinct and sensed that there was something else in the dungeon. The storage base of the Green Vine and Red Mist factions had been almost completely destroyed. Song Rui surveyed the empty rooms. Apart from a pile of monster corpses, there was nothing to be found. Jing Ying complained that there was nothing to analyze. The clues were too scattered and didn't fit together into a coherent picture. Jing Ying was also upset that her friend, while investigating some archive, had managed to lose Yan Hao. The nameless warrior explained that they had once had a conflict with Zhang Shi over Captain Jia, but the guy didn't think Zhang would dare to strike at the Special Operations Unit. Jing Ying had reported this to the Chief of Staff the day before, and he was very angry. The military found one of the local guards and brought him in for questioning. They demanded to extract everything he knew from him, but there was too little information. The guard told them about a hiding place, which by that point had already been emptied. He couldn't say anything at all about those behind it all, because Captain Zhang Shi didn't allow his men to dig any deeper. Jing Ying had uncovered some secrets related to the Green Vine. If Li Qi told everything honestly now, it could be considered a confession. If not, he would simply be shot. Li Qi immediately remembered something important. It turned out that Captain Zhang often secretly visited the Red Mist storage facility, which belonged to the Green Vine group. The girls were hearing about the Red Mist storage facility for the first time. The deputy head of the city defense squad confirmed. There was definitely something fishy about that place. Captain Sun gave the order to move out and immediately check what was going on there. The adjutant tried to stop her, saying that headquarters had ordered the main forces to be brought to Kishi City to suppress the riot there, which would take some time. However, Captain Sun believed that her primary task was not to suppress the rebellion, but to ensure Yan Hao's safety. She instructed the aide to return to Chishi with the traitor Li Qi and wait there for the main forces. Captain Sun set off for the Red Mist storage facility with a group of close comrades. The guards tried to stop the girls, saying that the facility was under guard and that even Special Forces soldiers were prohibited from entering without permission. Sun Rui sent the guard flying with a powerful blow to the arm, demanding that he get out of her way. The guards were unable to stop the unexpected guests. They needed to report everything to Mr. Liu immediately. Lu Feng, standing on one of the red mist containers, watched the unexpected guests who had appeared on his territory. Sun Rui warned that they needed to be very careful. This might be one of the enemy's key bases. The next moment, a powerful explosion rang out near the girl. It turned out that Lu Feng had jumped off the container. He had intended to startle her and was surprised by her quick reaction. Jing Ying managed to jump out of the way. Captain Sun prepared to defend herself and asked who had actually appeared near them. But the villain had no intention of answering questions and rushed to attack Jing Ying. The aide used a combat barrier, shielding the girl with his body. It wasn't exactly a huge help, but withstanding Lu Feng's blow and not dying was already a great result. Song Rui was furious. She drew her knife and leaped toward the stranger, preparing to attack him. The aide warned the captain she needed to be careful, because this warrior was at least a B rank. Lu Feng dodged the knife strike very quickly and professionally. In the very next moment, the man delivered a powerful blow to Captain Sun's torso. The girl didn't have time to use anything for defense. When she found herself exhausted on the floor, Lu Feng ran up to her and delivered a kick that was practically impossible to survive. The aide realized the situation was dire. Captain Sun was in close combat without her beast weapons or firearms and couldn't unleash her full potential. Lu Feng lifted the girl by her hair and mocked her skill level, saying that yesterday's rat had even been stronger than the captain. Sun Rui realized who the villain was talking about. The girl knew she couldn't lose to someone like Lu Feng. Lu Feng was busy. He swung his fist, intending to test which of them could withstand his blows better. But at that moment, he himself received a powerful blow to the jaw, and even the mask on Lu Feng's face cracked. The blow was strong, and the villain was sent flying to the far end of the room, knocking down the walls. Yan Hao, and it was of course him, managed to jump up and catch Captain Song Rui in his arms. The young man gently set the beautiful woman down on the ground and asked how she was feeling. The captain was surprised by the unexpected appearance of her savior. Jing Ying also wanted to hug Hao, but they still had a lot of unresolved business, so they had to deal with it right away. By this point, Lu Feng had come to. He didn't understand what was happening and was grimacing in excruciating pain. The villain never expected to see Yan Hao here, but the guy said that someone they both knew had brought him here. Lu Feng saw Captain Zhang Shi and realized that this scoundrel had betrayed him and led their enemies to their secret hideout. In a fit of rage, Lu Feng couldn't control himself and lunged at his former accomplice. Zhang screamed for help, but Hao stopped Lu Feng by grabbing his arm and said that the captain couldn't die now. The special task force wanted to talk to Captain Zhang and hear many interesting things from him. Lu Feng was genuinely taken aback. Some sewer grates were in his way, so he activated a sound wave against Yan Hao. However, the guy easily parried it, saying the attack was too slow, and responded with a kick to the head. Although Lu Feng was sent flying by the blow, his rage only grew and he soared into the air, completely enraged, determined to finish Yan Hao off right then and there. Lu Feng activated his sonic wind blade and directed it at Hao, but the young man managed to dodge the attack. Jing Ying was displeased to learn that the villain possessed the same wind abilities as she did. Captain Song wanted to figure out who he was, but Zhang Shi said he actually knew nothing, except that Lu Feng was a subordinate of Hong. The sonic wind blades approached from all sides, but Hao looked completely calm and waited for the right moment to dodge. After dodging, Hao launched his own attack, believing that even though his opponent was of a high rank, he was incapable of anything. The young man broke through to Lu Feng and punched him in the torso. The thug clearly hadn't expected such strength and power. The force of the blow was so great that Lu Feng's back dented one of the tanks of red mist, and it immediately began to crack. Soon the red mist spread throughout the room. Song Rui ordered her aide to take everyone far away. They wouldn't survive the mist's effects. Captain Sun herself decided to stay and keep an eye on Yan Hao's actions. Of course it was dangerous, but she had made that decision. Jing Ying took her friend by the hand and said she had a way to help Captain Sun. At that moment, Lu Feng took out a capsule and, looking at it, declared that no one could defeat him just like that. After that, the villain swallowed the pill, knowing that his health bar would drop, but he would retain his sanity and be able to absorb the power of the red mist. Having absorbed the mist, Lu Feng prepared to fight Hao. Yan Hao engaged his opponent in combat and soon sensed that Lu Feng had begun to move faster. The villain declared that this was Class A speed, and now Hao would feel it firsthand. Lu Feng felt the red mist granting him strength, and he was able to strike Yan Hao, knocking him aside. However, despite all his efforts, it was clear that his attacks were being blocked. Liu Feng realized he wouldn't be able to hold out at this level for long and needed to finish off his opponent. At that moment, Jing Ying stood atop the tank. The girl was channeling the power of the wind, whirling it into a spiral hurricane. It was a storm shield designed to create a protective field around Hao. Yan Hao felt his body become much more agile, and it was all thanks to his red-haired assistant. Lu Feng had no intention of giving up and directed his attack straight at the top of the tank, where his enemies were. Hao held out his hand and managed to stop the red mist cannon, laughing at his opponent, who thought this was some kind of unprecedented ability. By this point, Liu Feng realized he was dealing with an unusual man who was absorbing his attacks. Yan Hao moved closer and began attacking the villain, giving him no chance to escape or maneuver. Hao declared that red mist wouldn't help Liu Feng because he was going to finish him off right then and there. Liu Feng could no longer put up a fight. He realized he was dealing with a true monster. The main organizers witnessed the entire fight, and they couldn't believe how this was possible. Lu Ten, the leader in Qixi City, was surprised to learn that Lu Feng had actually lost. It turned out that Yan Hao was much stronger than they had thought. Lu Teng decided he would need to keep a closer eye on this guy. In the meantime, he ordered his subordinates to destroy all remaining information and follow him. Lu Ten wanted to ask the guy downstairs to clean up here and press the button on the remote control. In an unknown location, a capsule containing the beast core was activated. The enormous monster stirred, sensing hunger. Hao stood over his defeated opponent and demanded that Liu Feng tell him where Hong was. Jing Ying poked the motionless body with her chopstick and said that now he wouldn't be able to answer them. Hao had knocked him out. Yan Hao scratched the back of his head. After all, he hadn't done anything serious. Zhang Shi looked at Hao with admiration, ready to serve him and carry out every order from the boy who turned out to be super strong. Zhang agreed to lead everyone to the hidden rooms where the main operations were taking place. But Zhang Shi himself didn't know all the details, because he hadn't been let in on them. He only knew where the hidden laboratories were located. An unexpected sound rang out, and Hao said that was exactly where they needed to go. The boy sensed human breath behind the wall. He could have broken down the door with ease, but he didn't want to hurt anyone. Jing Yin said she could handle the door herself and asked for access. The girl connected her computer to the mechanism and began to pick the lock. Soon the door swung open. What they saw inside was simply monstrous. The room was filled with capsules containing people. It was terrifying to imagine how many people had become guinea pigs in the hands of these villainous researchers. Captain Sun was furious and ready to kill Zhang without a trial, but he insisted he knew nothing and was merely following orders. At that moment, Captain Jia recognized one of the men in the capsule. It was A Shu, the patrolman Hao and his friends had been searching for. Hao wanted to smash the capsules right away, but Jing Ying stopped him just in time, explaining that they were life support devices and destroying them would kill the people inside. First, they needed to find special equipment and call for backup. Song Rui said that Lin Yuxing and his men had already arrived in the city and summoned him to the Red Mist storage facility. One of the soldiers noticed that the beast core was flashing constantly. Everyone leaned over the machine, unsure of what was happening, whether it was good or bad. Zhang Shi, terrified, fell to the floor and began backing away, vaguely realizing the consequences. Jing Ying also detected strange fluctuations. It seemed there was a high concentration of red mist here. Suddenly, the entire room shook as if in an earthquake. Hao shouted at the girl to move away. Something unpredictable was happening with the capsule. And indeed, the device began to shake violently, and it became clear that they needed to escape. Lu Feng had turned into a monster, the result of the red mist entering his lungs. The villain had mutated. Sun Rui froze in place. The monster's appearance was exactly like her uncle's. Hao realized that the device with the beast core was a lure that attracted monsters, and that someone very dangerous was approaching. He grabbed the capsule containing the core to take the monster far away. Otherwise, it would destroy everything and kill the people in the capsules. Hao and Sun Rui ran out into the street. The monster Lu Feng was chasing after them. They tried to lure it away while a helicopter hovered over the lab. Lu Ten watched Yan Hao with interest. He decided that if the guy could handle the monster, he would deserve even more of his attention. Hao hurled the capsule high into the sky and shouted at Sun Rui to step back. Lu Feng was so drawn to the capsule that he leaped, trying to grab the core. But he wasn't the only one. A huge worm opened its mouth, ready to swallow the capsule along with Lu Feng. The main forces arrived in Qixi City to restore order and suppress the riots. Lin Yuxing didn't understand why they were going to the Red Mist storage base or what could have happened there. The driver had only relayed that Captain Sun had mentioned a room beneath the base where people were. The military vehicles drove into the storage facility and saw a huge monster towering over the buildings. Lin Yuxing was displeased. He was the one who had to fight this monster. The man kicked the car door open and leaped out. Fighting such an opponent was only possible by using his abilities. He ordered his subordinates to take the reinforcements to the research facility while he stayed behind to deal with the monster. The man was strong, and with a few leaps he covered a vast distance. Even for such a powerful warrior, what was happening was unexpected and strange. The enormous monster towered over the buildings. It seemed that such creatures had been kept in the depths of the laboratories. The monster navigated by thermal aura because its vision was poor. It had spent most of its life underground. Now the monster was navigating using thermal sensors and opened its jaws wide, preparing to swallow a human whole. Yan Hao activated his animal claws and struck several times, but not even a light scratch appeared on the monster's skin. Captain Sun realized they needed to retreat. Hao knew the monster had taken a personal interest in him. If they left, the beast would attack the base. Hao decided to hold the monster off here, while Captain Sun was to take the people to the lab. Sun Rui couldn't imagine how the guy would fight the monster alone, but she wasn't going to leave him behind. Hao was furious. He didn't want to let the monster destroy the evidence, so he charged into the attack. Jing Ying connected her computer to one of the capsules trying to retrieve data, but aside from detecting life, everything else had been destroyed. But these people were lucky. They had met a true master, Jing Ying. At that moment, the door burst open and reinforcements arrived, surprising and encouraging. Captain Jai Jun was relieved. He had survived because Yan Hao had saved him, but now he himself was in grave danger. Among the reinforcements was Then Yi, who informed the aide that they had been sent by Lin Yongxing, the new commander-in-chief, to assist Captain Sun. Lin Yongji explained that Captain Sun had gone to fight the monster, and he wanted to find out where his brother was after all. It's not every day your brother becomes commander-in-chief. Yan Hao used his shadow stealth to sneak up from the right spot and deal at least some damage to the monster. Then he activated Shadow Step, but it seemed the monster could still sense his presence. Despite all his tricks, Hao made it to the monster's snout and leaned close to its eye, realizing that this might be its only weak spot. Hao sank his claws into the monster's eye and simultaneously activated the queen bee's venom. The monster writhed and roared loudly. Then it shot out a serpentine tongue, grabbed Hao, and gradually pulled him into its throat. Sun Rui activated her abilities and unleashed a mini version of an electromagnetic discharge, carefully aimed so as not to harm Hao. Her attack proved accurate and effective. The monster's tongue released Hao. Without nuclear armor or weapons, and using her superpower only minimally, Sun Rui realized that only Yan Hao was capable of wielding such power with his bare hands. The girl sat there, unaware that the monster had already set its snout on Hao, who was running at full speed trying to protect her. Suddenly, a powerful explosion rang out, literally tearing the giant worm's head apart. Lin Yuxing appeared before the astonished crowd, his hand ablaze with fire. He asked his comrades how they were feeling. Captain Sun tried to explain something, searching for the right words, but everything was clear without any further explanation. Lin Yuxing possessed the power of fire and demanded that the monster be handed over to him. Hao watched the battle with admiration. The power of an A-rank fighter was impressive. Lin Yuxing unleashed fire from all sides, but soon realized that the enemy was tougher than expected. He decided to let the monster get closer so that the fireball would have the greatest effect. The monster approached, snapped its jaws open, and released a mist toward the people. For several minutes, everything was engulfed in a terrifying sandstorm. The young people covered their eyes and mouths. The commander warned everyone to be careful. The monster could be anywhere. Yan Hao suddenly sensed movement and realized with a pang of dread the giant worm was burrowing underground. The asphalt beneath their feet began to crack and everyone scattered, realizing that the monster could burst out right from under their feet. They had to stop the sandstorm, and suddenly, as if by magic, it happened. Lin Yuxing couldn't understand what had happened. It turned out that Jing Ying had come to the rescue, and she was excellent at controlling the wind. Captain Sun was puzzled by the appearance of the helpers and the threat to the underground base. The aide reported reinforcements brought by Yongxing had already arrived at the base, and the experimenters were safe. Now, together, the military could try to deal with the monster. They had a chance to win. The monster also showed some quick thinking. Noticing that there were more enemies, it buried its snout in the ground, trying to escape the battlefield. Yunxin began to gather a fire attack, and Jing Ying added the power of the wind, all of it directed at the monster. They wanted to believe the monster would burn, but despite their efforts, it remained alive. Yongxin realized the monster possessed the ability to regenerate, an extremely rare but real ability to destroy the beast once and for all. They needed to destroy its cores. Jing Ying had no idea how to locate the core of such a giant. The monster unleashed another sandstorm, which Jing Ying successfully repelled using the wind. Captain Song was gathering electromagnetic energy. The girl activated electromagnetic induction using a device similar to an MRI scanner. The result exceeded expectations. She was able to see where the core was located inside the giant. The core was located on the left side of its abdomen. The energy was so intense that Sun Rui could barely stay on her feet. Yongxin ordered the captain to be taken far away. The girl had proven too valuable and troublesome. Now it was clear, the monster was vulnerable, and the commander-in-chief, with renewed strength, gathered firepower for the attack. He unleashed fire upon the spot where the core was located. After the fire burned through, the core was exposed. Everyone began attacking the monster directly at the core using fire and wind. It seemed that victory was almost within their grasp. But the core's protective shell was too strong, and ordinary attacks couldn't break it. Yan Hao realized he needed to use something stronger, the red mist. But he had expended a lot of energy in his battle with Lu Feng, and he might not have enough left. That's when he noticed a capsule lying on the ground, which he had brought out of the lab. Jing Yin had explained that the capsule contained a strange energy. Hao cracked open the capsule and began to absorb the core. It soon became clear, this wasn't ordinary red mist. Excruciating pain shook Hao's body. The monster raged, sensing a threat to its core, hurling people aside regardless of their strength and abilities. Adjutant Lin fled, carrying Captain Sun on his back, glancing back and seeing the monster behind them. It seemed the end was near, but Yan Hao gathered enough energy, regained his composure, and concentrated it all into a powerful sphere, attacking the monster's core. The monster tried to dodge the red mist, but it was almost impossible for it to do so. There was an explosion like a nuclear blast. Everything around them was engulfed in flames. Yan Hao felt as if he were nearly dead, or at least unconscious. His sister ran toward him, finally reunited with her beloved brother. They embraced, and the young man began to apologize for his long absence. Hao asked his sister what she was doing there, how she had ended up there, and where they were anyway. Suddenly, a fire flared up between the brother and sister, separating them and preventing them from approaching each other. Hao woke up and sat up abruptly. He realized it had been a dream in which he had seen Shui, and once again he had been unable to save her. He looked around, trying to figure out where he was and what he had just experienced, a dream or reality. Lin Yongxing was sitting on the sofa in the same room. He said that Hao had been in a critical condition and someone had to deal with it. Yongxing reported that his condition had been terrible. He hadn't regained consciousness for 3 days, and everyone thought he wouldn't wake up. Fortunately, everything turned out all right. Hao confirmed that he felt great, thinking to himself, if his superpower had gotten out of control, his comrades might have killed him. But he couldn't hold it against them right now. Hao really was half monster. Captain Sun came too. Thanks to her help, they managed to destroy the monster, and everyone moved to the research room. Hao was very concerned about how Ashu was feeling. They were supposed to have transferred him from the lab and helped him recover. At that moment, the ward door flew open, and Jing Ying rushed in. She wanted to make sure Ashu didn't have any symptoms or strange changes in his body. Like a true doctor, she checked all his vital signs to make sure that Yan Hao was in perfect condition after ingesting the highly concentrated red mist. Now another question arose. What biological species could Hao be classified as, since he was beyond the scope of human understanding? Hao didn't want to listen to her lecture and, to stop the examination, covered the girl's mouth but asked how things were going with Ashu. At the research institute, in an isolation room hooked up to machines, a young man lay surrounded by a dense red mist. No anomalies or infections were detected. His consciousness still hadn't returned, and the only thing left to do was wait. Hao was furious. He wanted to know who was experimenting on people this way and who was behind it. Lin Yuxing said that Captain Zhang Shi had already confessed to everything. Yan Hao wanted to know the details, suspecting it was related to the green vine, but his comrades were in no hurry to answer. Soon, Captain Song Rui appeared in the hallway declaring that Hao was the one to blame for everything. He didn't understand who she was talking about. Lu Feng had mentioned Mr. Hoon. Perhaps the monster had been used on purpose. Song Rui explained all the evidence had reached Captain Zhang. He had confessed, and behind it all was someone more powerful, controlling all events. After that, she turned and left, telling Hao to follow her. The chief of staff wanted to see him. Hao didn't understand how Sun Rui had found him there. It turned out that Jing Ying had warned her friend. Hao was angry at his shadow, which followed his every move, Every bite he took and every trip to the bathroom. Everyone gathered in Chief of Staff Sun Lin's office. No one wanted to start an unpleasant conversation. Everyone involved was waiting for the situation to be explained and for everything to be laid out clearly. The Chief of Staff said he wouldn't discuss recent events. The military and all forces had watched as Hao defeated the giant monster. The young man had been sucked into the eye of the storm. Powerful gusts of wind swirled around him, and if he wasn't careful, they could sweep him away. Sun Lin wanted to know what Hao's plans were. Hao had originally intended to act in secret and hadn't expected everything to come to light. Besides, he was being treated with such fanfare that he replied he wanted to hear the details first. Sun Lin said that everyone already knew what Captain Zhang Shi had told them, but Hao believed that Zhang Shi was holding back. According to the Green Vine statement, the underground base belonged to them, but they were unaware of the plans of a leader named Hong. They had never been naive, they had collaborated with the military, and without hard evidence, it was difficult to investigate. In other words, even if the Chief of Staff wanted to investigate Green Vine, he wouldn't get anywhere. Those at the top wouldn't allow it. I'd like to know exactly who is at the top, some mysterious pinnacle of power. The Chief of Staff said, "We're talking about the highest authority, SU. Now he could rely only on Yan Hao's strength and abilities." The young man realized the Chief of Staff wasn't going to control him. He was simply afraid of not being able to handle his power and wanted to make him his pawn. Song Rui turned to her father. Hao is right in the eye of the storm. Why does the chief need control over him? Lin Yuxing voiced his thought. Instead of being the prey, it's better to gather our strength and become the hunter. If we want to survive, we need to change something. It's worse to be a victim. It's better to become a hunter. Everyone present agreed with this. Lin Yuxing organized a 3-month comprehensive training program to enhance the combat capabilities of the new members of the Burning Blood Squad. But in reality, the training was just a pretext. The real goal was to postpone internal disagreements, eliminate spies, and get better organized. Hao thought he wanted to borrow their strength. Right now, he knew nothing about the situation in the army. The most important thing was to find Shu as soon as possible. The point system will become available 1 month after the recruits are enlisted. Points can be earned by completing missions, training, and battles, every man for himself, and can also be exchanged for military items. Yan Hao once again outscored all the other guys. Some thought this was unfair. They had worked themselves to exhaustion and received only a couple dozen points. A few had heard that Yan Hao had killed a giant monster, but few believed it. Why would someone with such abilities remain an ordinary team member? There was a theory that Instructor Lin had been struck down in that battle. Some were simply trying to use the situation to make themselves look good. Sun Rui advised Hao to keep his rash assumptions to himself. He had more than enough strength. Real arguments broke out among the squad members. Even though it was pointless, they were all comrades. Captain Tang appeared in the training hall and stated that the points awarded to Hao had been calculated by the system according to established rules. The instructors had checked everything. No one doubted the accuracy of the calculations, but everyone was curious to see who would score the highest. Captain Tang Ye offered advice and tips. The cadets were tired of their daily routine and wanted to have some fun. They suggested holding a match to see who would win. Even Jing Ying was thrilled by the idea and promised to help spend the money they earned. Hao realized that Zhang Jing couldn't be stopped by conventional means, so he decided to take part in the duel, especially since Captain Tang Ye was interested. Everyone was eagerly awaiting the upcoming duel. Captain Tang was a strong B-rank player with extensive combat experience, while Yan Hao was still a novice. Tang Ye warned his opponent that his primary ability was ice-based, and he was about to demonstrate it. He directed a stream of ice toward his opponent, demonstrating a versatile weapon based on a beast core. Hao dodged the attack but immediately realized that Tang Ye was significantly stronger than Liu Feng. Tang Ye continued his attack, preparing the ice once more, and warned, "It's not over yet, Yan Hao. You'd better stay on your toes." Hao dodged again. Despite the destructive force, the technique was powerful, but not particularly fast. Tang Ye placed his hand on the floor, activating the ice, which gradually covered everything around him. But in the very next moment, Hao was right next to him, claws out, and Captain Tang Ye was genuinely stunned by his opponent's speed. Suddenly, a pillar of fire flared up between the rivals, separating them. Lin Yuxing used his ability to stop the fight and declared that Yan Hao had won the round. Captain Tan Yi had no objections, graciously conceding defeat. Everyone present was in shock. The captain had truly lost. Now the guys had no reason to doubt that Hao deserved his points. Jing Ying was pleased. She had taken good care of Hao's health, and now the guy would definitely share his earnings with her. Zhang Jin had his own take on the match. He was convinced of the huge gap between himself and Yan Hao. He decided he absolutely had to become stronger than his enemy so he could face him again, no matter the cost. A month later, Chief of Staff Sun Ling was speaking with the head of the Technical Intelligence Department. A brutal orc attack had occurred in the northwestern region. A local patrol unit had tracked them down to the city of Suan. The news about the orcs came as a surprise they hadn't been heard from in a long time. Analysis revealed that the person in the photograph was Chief of Staff Sun Zhao's missing younger brother. I would like to know what the chances are that the orcs will come to their senses. The doctors considered it nearly impossible. Disfigurement is not only a physical phenomenon but also an intrusion into the mind. Only Yan Hao could retain his human essence, but it was unknown for how long. Jing Anshan wanted to know his old friend's plans. If it was impossible to capture his brother safely, he would have to be eliminated. After all, if Sun Rui found out the truth, she would never forgive it. Song Lin once sacrificed his family for the greater good, and now to protect the innocent, he would have to pay a certain price. Song Lin understood this. He had to do it. Sun Jui rushed out of the shower when the phone rang, signaling that important information had been discovered. The girl rushed into the Chief of Staff's office, not understanding why her father hadn't told her the news about her uncle himself. Sun Lin was furious and demanded that his daughter not interfere. The man was planning to send a special operations team to work with Sun Zhao. Sun Rui was emotional and begged her father to let her go with the team. Her father asked her directly, "If you were ordered to kill Sun Zhao with your own hands, would you have the fortitude to pull the trigger?" The girl couldn't answer. The Chief of Staff said he was relieving her of the duty to protect Yan Hao without his specific orders. She was not to take any action. Sun Rui went down to the underground parking garage where Jing Ying was waiting for her. Her friend had packed a backpack with essentials. Jing Ying handed the backpack to Sun Rui and explained that it contained essentials. She promised to buy some time to delay Sun Lin and reminded her that her services were very valuable. Someday Sun Rui would be forced to pay for them. A scene flashed through Sun Rui's mind where a huge monster could have killed her, but her uncle had ordered her to run and save herself. The girl thought that last time she should have mustered the courage to confess to her family that they had been bribed to protect her. Perhaps then things would have turned out differently. Now she wasn't ready to back down and was looking for a way to restore her uncle to his human form. Jing Ying, sitting in the camp dining hall, ate with relish, thinking that Hao had finally figured out how to thank her. Her friend was ready to shed tears of delight. In the past 6 months, he hadn't eaten such a luxurious and delicious meal even once. Hao asked his friends not to exaggerate. They had helped him, and now that he had money, he had decided to treat them. It was strange that neither Captain Sun nor Adjutant Lin had shown up. Jing Ying explained that the captain had business to attend to. She had taken leave, and Adjutant Lin was on a mission. Hao tried to make sense of what was happening. Sun Rui had previously tried to recruit him into her group, but now her attitude toward him had changed. He didn't understand what she really wanted. Jing Ying was happily finishing her meal when the phone rang. She checked the information and showed it to Yan Hao, asking for his opinion. It turned out that A Shu had just regained consciousness. They needed to go to him right away. Hao wanted them to call a teenager named Ali. The boy had been promised help in finding his older brother. But while A Shu was unconscious, they hadn't told him anything. After that, everyone headed to the Burning Blood Medical Research Institute. Although Ash had regained consciousness, he looked very weak and sick. Ali rushed to embrace his brother, whom he had searched for so long and who had disappeared somewhere. Hao said that it was all very sweet, but he didn't want to get in the way of their reunion. He had a few questions for Ashu that needed answers. Ashu didn't know this guy, but his younger brother said that Hao had saved them both, and that Yan Hao was now their benefactor. Hao held out a photo of his sister and asked Ashu if he remembered this girl. Jing Ying stepped in to remind him. She explained that Ashu had participated in a search and rescue mission with a group, and this girl was among those they had saved. Ashu strained his memory and did indeed recall the day the red fog had broken out. The army had temporarily formed rescue squads. Ashu was sent to the city center to search for survivors. The scene was horrific. Infected people, mutated monsters, and dead bodies everywhere. Unexpectedly, the rescuers found a girl near a crashed helicopter. She was physically unharmed, but she couldn't remember anything and barely spoke. The rescuers could only take her to a shelter set up by the military. She stayed there for 2 days, and then 2 strangers appeared. They had orders from higher-ups. The documents confirmed this. The strangers said they were taking the girl away for treatment of psychological trauma. Since the girl couldn't remember anything and there was no one to look after her, she was escorted to Suan for treatment. A Shu remembers almost nothing after that. He continued to receive various assignments, and after he left Suan, an accident occurred. Yan Hao realized that there was at least one lead. It was the city of Suan. The place where Uncle Sun Rui had been appearing frequently lately was now known. Yan Shui had been taken there. This was clearly no coincidence. The city of Suan held many secrets. In the mountains on the outskirts of Suan, Sun Rui wandered in search of clues, scouring practically the entire city. But the girl found no information about her uncle. Perhaps he was somewhere in these mountains. The townspeople did look suspicious. They were being guarded by men. Sun Rui saw patrols making their rounds. The guards were discussing recent events among themselves and didn't understand why the boss had ordered security to be tightened. Lately, someone had been constantly trying to snoop around for information. The boss was afraid that things would come to light and that would attract unwanted attention. Sun Rui followed the guards and saw trucks loaded with mysterious cargo, trying to figure out what was going on. It looked suspicious. People were living under tight security, and the trucks clearly weren't carrying ordinary goods. At that moment, unfortunately, Sun Rui caught the eye of the guards who noticed the stranger. One of them pointed a gun at her and sent his colleague to inform the boss. Sun Rui realized she was surrounded and knew she couldn't stay there. She activated the electromagnetic discharge and attacked the guards. To keep the operation covert, Sun Jui wore only the glove with the beast's core, not using her full power, but that should have been enough against the guards. The men realized they were facing a gifted girl and needed to be careful with her. Suddenly, a shout rang out. A stranger indignantly declared that this girl had trespassed onto his territory. Sun Rui attacked the rude man, stopping him with her strength. However, the man smiled and said that it didn't even hurt or tickle. He grabbed the girl by the arm and flung her aside as if she were a rag doll. The underground leader approached the girl and demanded that she tell him who she was and who had sent her. Sun Jui analyzed the situation. Her lightning didn't work on the man, which meant he had abilities too. The girl had taken out all the guards, but she realized that her electricity wasn't working on the leader because of his high resistance. Although she couldn't use her super move, she hoped to paralyze the leader, at least for a moment. Sun Rui approached and struck him with a bolt of lightning. Everything around them sparkled with powerful electricity. It turned out that the leader was wearing an army combat suit that amplified his abilities and increased his resistance to blows. If not for the suit, he would have already been killed, but now Sun Rui had no second chance. The leader sent his henchmen after the girl, allowing them to play with her. Sun Rui felt weak. After using her ability, she was exhausted and could barely resist. But in the very next moment, Yan Hao appeared before her, scattered the guards, and asked if the girl was all right. The number of enemies was growing. They formed a tight circle around Hao and Sun Jui. The leader ordered them to capture the pair and promised a tenth of the mine's profits to whoever completed the task. Suddenly, a storm summoned by Jing Ying swept in, and the bandits scattered in all directions. The leader realized that another gifted person had appeared. He didn't understand who they were or why they had come to his mind. Jing Ying wanted to find out who the leader was and why he had attacked her friend. The leader realized there would be no talking. He intended to destroy everyone who had trespassed onto his territory and began gathering energy. Song Rui realized that the leader was also gifted, and his combat strength was at least B rank. Hao asked if the leader could resolve the entire situation with a single strike. Now he had to prove that he was strong. Hao waited until the leader approached and delivered a powerful blow. This was his chance to test the results of his special training with Instructor Lin. Seeing the leader's body lying lifeless on the ground, Yan Hao suggested that the girls leave first and then discuss the news. Everyone piled onto the vintage motorcycle with a sidecar and sped away from the mine. Hao said that, according to Jing Ying, Captain Song had taken leave and skipped training to investigate something about a certain person in the city of Suan. Very strange if the captain's subject of investigation is that group of freaks they'd just defeated. Song Rui admitted that she had actually run away in secret. Hao glanced at Jing Ying. The girl was happily eating a bun. She was a skilled liar and could pretend not to understand a thing without batting an eye. As for the people they had just fought, they were a local underground gang. Song Rui had stumbled upon their hideout in the mountains and didn't actually know who they were or what they were up to. But the captain wasn't interested in them. Sun Rui explained that she has an uncle who was infected by the red mist during an incident. He later went missing, but recently there have been reports that he was seen somewhere in this area. Hao was even more confused if it was her uncle infected by the red mist. Why was the investigation secret? Had the chief of staff really forbidden his daughter from looking for her uncle? Sun Rui replied that upon remembering Lu Feng, her uncle had become even more savage and was now very dangerous. In fact, she blamed herself for her uncle becoming this way, and therefore felt she had to protect him. The girl explained that she wanted to recruit Yan Hao into the Burning Blood team so that with his power, they could find a way to restore her uncle to his human form. Now it became clear why Sun Rui had obeyed her father. She wanted to save her uncle, and also what kind of deal she had been talking about at the very beginning of their acquaintance. Hao replied that he was, of course, willing to help with the search, but he doubted he could handle someone like Lu Feng or anyone stronger. Nevertheless, the young man promised to do everything in his power. Sun Rui looked at her friend with gratitude for his words of support and willingness to help. By this time, Jingying had already finished eating and said that since everything had been cleared up, it was time for them to set off. And only now did Captain Sun realize how her friends had ended up in the mountains. Hao explained that Soldier A Shu had woken up and remembered that Sister Shui had been brought here 6 months ago. All these days, Yan Hao had been trying to gather information by any means necessary, but most people were hostile toward him. He had a feeling that there was a direct connection between all these events. But in any case, no matter how the circumstances unfolded, he had to find his sister. That was his main goal. The city of Suan was a small, cozy town nestled at the foot of the mountains. The friends entered the city, but they kept running into soldiers, which forced them to waste time dealing with them. They just wanted to make their way inside without stopping. Jingying used her wind to drive away the strangers who appeared in their path. Hao and Jing noticed that someone had struck a local thug hard. They didn't want to get into a fight, but it seemed they couldn't avoid it. They had to deal with the stranger. However, it turned out he wasn't a stranger at all. It was Captain Tang Yi. He greeted his friends and asked them not to attack him. After that, the captain said this wasn't the place for a conversation and invited them to follow him. Tan Ye explained that he had received orders from the chief of staff to search for Uncle Sun Zhao and ensure Sun Rui's safety. Upon hearing the sounds of battle, he assumed it was them. Song Rui asked, "Is Captain Tang Yi really here alone?" The young man replied that the main fighters were hidden in the mountains. They had found traces of orcs, but there was a lord-level creature in the mountains, and the military was looking for a way to bypass it. Tang Ye added that, according to the chief of staff, if his daughter returned with her friends, the punishments might be reduced, and it would be better to entrust the search mission to professionals. Sun Rui was stubborn. This was about her own uncle, and if there were any leads, she had to act. If the military laid a finger on her uncle, she would intervene. Tan Ye realized it was impossible to change her mind and said they needed to go together. He knew a deserted trail deep into the mountains, and after the mission was complete, he asked his friends to be sure to return to the city with him. After that, the captain said they needed to notify you and sent a message to that effect. Hao asked the captain if they had come across any laboratories or mines in the mountains. Tan Ye thought for a moment and said he had seen an abandoned building that looked somewhat like a research institute. Hao realized no one in the city had seen the lab Ash had mentioned, which meant it was hidden in the mountains. They had to go there. Finally, the group approached a cave. No one was watching here, and there wasn't even any electronic equipment. Hao handed the captain a bundle, the weapon he and Jingying had brought with them from the city. Jingying added that this was a special gift from Hao. He had used a Thunder Beast core and a huge amount of alliance points to upgrade the weapon for Sun Rui. Jingying wanted Hao to make a super weapon for her too, and he promised to take care of it next time. After that, the group was ready to enter the cave, staying on high alert. Tang Ye said they needed to keep going straight ahead. That's where their temporary camp was located. Jing Yin checked the sensor readings. The energy reaction was too chaotic. The young people advanced deeper into the cave, where a huge, monstrous snake lay in wait for them. Waiting for the right moment, it opened its jaws and spat venom at the group. Jingying was distracted by the sensor and didn't notice the danger in time. Captain Tang Ye managed to raise a protective barrier, shielding the girl from the venom. He hadn't expected the monster to be hiding there. The venom proved to be very dangerous. It dissolved the protective barrier and landed on the captain's body. Hao, watching what was happening, thought that the captain had reacted as if he knew in advance that the creature would attack Jingying. Tang Ye said that this creature was excellent at camouflage. His squad had suffered heavy losses, and now he was poisoned and couldn't help in any way. Hao declared that he would help and rushed to attack the monstrous snake. Tang Ye was very surprised. He had seen how Yan Hao was capable of single-handedly subduing a lord-level monster. Previously, the captain had thought he could fight this guy on his own. But now everyone understood that Yan Hao was the special unit's true trump card. At that moment, the shadow of another monster appeared in the sky, ready to attack the group of people. It was the Blazing Bull, a lord-level minotaur. It landed nearby and watched the people closely. But the spectacle didn't end there. A steel-clad burrowing lizard, also a lord-level creature, emerged from beneath the ground. Now it looked simply astonishing. Previously, only one lord-level creature had appeared, but now there were three of them at once. A man appeared on the rock, surprised to see a group of people in front of him. He said that last time he had been careless, but now he would see how these young men and women would handle the situation. Hao realized that this man was capable of controlling alien creatures, and compared to those in Chishi City, the degree of obedience here was much higher. Tang Ye apologized to his comrades for putting them in danger and promised he would hold the snake and leave the rest to them. Jing Ying asked the captain not to overexert himself, hoping he would manage. Tang Ye considered it his duty to bring everyone back safe and sound. Hao turned to the captain. Before looking for the right people, they would have to clear some obstacles. Song Rui declared that she would take on the gorilla herself and test out the new weapon. Tan Ye was already standing face to face with the monstrous snake, which was about to attack him. The captain used an ice technique and froze everything around them so the snake couldn't move. The villain approached and said he'd watch to see how Hao would break through his defense. He believed the girl who controlled the wind was useless. After all, it was 4 against 1 now. Hao didn't bother with the 4 against 1 calculations, deciding to think about that later. The enormous Minotaur bull lowered his head, preparing to gore Sun Rui with his horns. The girl had already drawn her weapon. Everyone knew when Captain Sun was enraged, no one dared to provoke her. The girl could tell the weapon was truly excellent, light yet incredibly powerful. The Minotaur bull bent lower and lower toward his victim, but a powerful explosion rang out. The bull was the first to feel the power of the upgraded weapon. The whole group fought against the monsters, using their abilities, but Jing Ying realized that the stranger was capable of neutralizing their attacks, which greatly complicated the battle. At that moment, the lizard attacked the humans, and they jumped aside to avoid the blow. Hao and Jing Ying made their way through the rocks together, simultaneously figuring out how to deal with the enemy. Hao didn't even say a word. A single glance was enough for their plan for a joint attack to be set. Hao released his red mist and Jing Ying summoned the dragon stream whirlwind. Their coordinated actions allowed them to direct the poisonous mist at the monsters at tremendous speed, scattering it around them. As a result, the lizard began to twitch chaotically and threw the stranger off its head, who unexpectedly found himself right in front of Yan Hao. Hao delivered a powerful, sharp blow, knocking the stranger down, who simultaneously came under the lizard's attack. It was unlikely he would survive this. The unfortunate Minotaur bull was shaken by the lightning bolts that Sun Rui was directing at him from her upgraded weapon. The girl was very pleased. For the first time on her own, she had defeated a lord-level creature and felt great. Jing Ying told her friend that they had also defeated the lizard and the stranger who had been blocking their path. That was over. Only Captain Tang Yi remained, who was still trying to use his ice to restrain the snake so it wouldn't harm the others. Everyone rushed to the captain's aid, using their abilities against the snake. Soon the giant snake was attacked in every possible way and of course defeated. Song Rui thanked Hao for the weapon. It fit comfortably in her hand and fired with great power. Jing Yin wanted to check on Tang Ye. After all, he had been attacked by the snake's venom. The man said he was fine and that it was wonderful to have such strong people nearby, and that the battle had been a beautiful one. The stranger tried to escape, but accidentally ran into soldiers from the Burning Blood unit who were standing guard. They ordered him to stop. Captain Tanye thanked the soldiers for detaining the man, as he needed to be interrogated. Hao lifted the man with one hand and said he didn't have much time, so the bandit had to speak honestly and quickly, then perhaps he would be spared. Hao wanted to know exactly what the bandits were up to, why a cordon had been set up, and what they were constantly hauling out of the mountains in trucks. The gang leader explained that there was a red crystal containing energy in the mountains. The military didn't know about it, and the gangsters had been secretly mining the ore and selling it on the black market. He showed them where the mine was and promised to give all the ore to the unit as long as they didn't kill him. One of the soldiers reported that while clearing out the camp, they had seen fragments on the ground that looked like crystals. Hao wanted to deal with the ore later. For now, he was more interested in how the gang leader could control the creatures and where he got his military combat gear. The leader didn't want to reveal the whole truth, but admitted that someone was constantly supporting the bandits by providing equipment, protection, and other necessary supplies. At that moment, the Minotaur bull seemed to be coming to. He had woken up after the attack and recharged. It was astonishing. The Minotaur bull was alive and charged at the people preparing to attack. Everyone looked up at the Minotaur. At that moment, the gang leader pulled out a knife and swung it, intending to strike Jing Ying. A figure in a cloak appeared near the entrance to the Suin City mine. She entered the mine and stopped among the huge crystals scattered everywhere. The stranger reached out and placed her hand on one of the crystals, then began a process of dispersion that temporarily suppressed the erosion. Pulling back her hood, she revealed her red hair. A beautiful girl stood before them. She wanted to find out who was controlling the mutated beasts and was determined to uncover the truth. The gang leader first decided to kill the girl, then escape in the commotion. He raised his knife above Jing Ying. Suddenly, there was a commotion, and blood spilled. The cause of what was happening was unclear. Captain Tang Ye put his hand in the way of the knife and managed to stop the gang leader. Song Rui fired her weapon at the Minotaur, while Yan Hao slashed at him with his claws. Captain Song was stunned. Tang Ye had killed the gang leader, even though in her opinion he shouldn't have. The man looked a little upset and said it was a reflexive reaction, and he hadn't had time to think. The stranger could have told them a great deal more. Sun Rui was upset, and Hao asked her to explain what had happened here. Tang Yi said that the scoundrel had wanted to kill Jing Ying, and it was too dangerous to remain calm. Sun Rui replied that her friend could have easily dodged on her own. She didn't understand why Captain Tang Ye was being so overprotective of her. Tang Ye agreed. "You're right, they're excellent fighters. But I don't want to take risks and play Russian roulette. It's better to make a mistake myself than to let something happen to my comrades." Captain Sun didn't argue any further and accepted his answer. Then she asked how Tang Ye's arm was doing, and told him he needed to rest and recover at the temporary camp. Meanwhile, the red-haired girl in the cloak noticed a group of soldiers passing through the gorge. Her attention was drawn to one young man, Yan Hao. Hao seemed to sense something and looked back, but soon decided it must have been his imagination. The girl hid behind the rocks, unable to believe her eyes. Memories came flooding back. She had seen herself with her brother in photographs, and now she realized that she had run into him in the mountains completely by chance. Tang Ye led the whole group to an abandoned building, a laboratory in the mountains that the military had already inspected. There was no one inside. Hao doubted that the building was abandoned and said he had to check everything himself. Jing Ying went with him, while the rest continued the search, staying in touch. Hao ran into the building and looked around the rooms. "I hope to find at least someone here." It was indeed the place Patrolman Ashu had described, but it was empty and abandoned. Jing Ying moved objects around and was surprised. The building had been abandoned for a long time, but something piqued her interest. Captain Tang suggested that Song Rui check the other side of the building, while the others searched the lab. Song Rui turned to the captain. What other orders had he received from the chief of the general staff, besides the search? Tang Ye confirmed that there were other instructions. If the situation got out of hand, the facility must be destroyed immediately. He himself would determine whether the situation had gone beyond expectations and act accordingly on the spot. If the military could subdue Sun Jiao, destruction would not be necessary. In any case, they had to find him first. At the end of the day, everyone gathered in front of the Guan temporary camp. Tang Ye reported that he and Sun Rui had found no trace of her uncle. Hao reported that they had found a hard drive and a few other things. The hard drive was handed over to Jing Ying to recover the data, and she was working on it. In addition to the disk, a diary containing several entries was found. Due to a rock slide, the tank containing the red mist had cracked, and many of the city's residents had been infected. The military faction's cleanup operation turned into a massacre. The military secretly captured the infected survivors and studied the phenomenon of animal mutation. The new residents found red ore capable of absorbing the red mist and began mining it in secret. Giant mutated beasts were hiding inside the mountains, trying to break out. The authorities ordered an evacuation, emphasizing that the research subject, a girl, must be securely protected, while all other beast people were to be destroyed. At that moment, Jing Ying finished recovering the data from the hard drive, while the others tried to make sense of the diary's contents. What she saw on the drive stunned her and made her gasp. Before her was the research subject, a beautiful young girl. Jing Ying called her friends over and told them she had recovered one partition of the drive, and its contents seemed important to Hao. She booted up the drive, and everyone saw Yan Shui's file. Captain Tang Ye immediately approached. He had heard his friends' excited voices and wanted to know what was going on. Jing Ying quickly switched through the folders. The screen displayed photos of all sorts of beast-like people. Now everyone was studying these subjects together, trying to figure out who was creating such monsters. Hao understood that the diary touched on the military's internal secrets and specifically mentioned Shui, so he couldn't show it to Tang Ye. The hard drive was the only thing they'd managed to find. Song Rui thought about the beast people. Perhaps research at the Technical Intelligence Lab would help recover their data and bring her uncle back to life. Tang Ye pointed to a locked folder on the laptop screen, but he was told that it hadn't been opened yet. When the video started playing, A huge monster appeared on the screen, and nearby a young girl. Hao recognized his sister immediately, but didn't let it show, wondering how she could have ended up near an anomalous beast. Tan Ye paid no attention to the girl. He was interested in the Lord-level monster. If that creature was still alive, the entire region was in danger. The captain wanted to know the date of the photo. He estimated the position of the sun and the shadows to figure out exactly where in the Western Valley the photo had been taken. Tan Ye said he would immediately assemble a reconnaissance squad and asked Jing Ying to report any findings. Finally, the young people were left alone. Hao could barely contain himself. He wanted to see his sister in her entirety as soon as possible. Physical strength, mental state, all indicators significantly above the norm for a human. This report differed greatly from previous records on beastmen. The surname Hong was listed there, likely the very same gentleman people had been talking about in Kishi City. Sun Rui explained that her father had previously tried to investigate Mr. Hong's connection to the Green Corporation, but to no avail. If Hong had been involved in the experiment on Yan Shui, she might now be in the hands of someone from the Green Vine. The picture was gradually becoming clearer. Hao realized he had to find the beast, and his sister's appearance alongside the monster was clearly no coincidence. New leads would emerge. Jing Yin decided to go with Hao since they might need on-the-spot analysis. Song Rui added that she was coming too. The more of them there were, the faster they would deal with any problems that arose. The squad set out in search of the unknown monster. They walked through the mountains for a long time until one of the soldiers noticed a strange outline on the rock face. Looking closely, everyone saw a huge monster among the rocks. The captain now understood why they hadn't been able to spot it during their previous searches. Jing Yin checked its vital signs. They were very weak, as if the monster were asleep. For now, it posed no particular threat. The squad approached the sleeping beast and could examine it closely. Everyone was amazed. It was the first time they had seen such a gigantic beast. Jing Ying kept her eyes glued to the sensor. The vital signs began to rise rapidly. They had to escape immediately. The monster had been camouflaging itself all this time, pretending to be asleep. Tang Ye activated the ice shield and ordered the soldiers to spread out and take up defensive positions. The enormous monster opened its mouth wide and unleashed a gigantic stream of fire aimed at the people. The ice that Tan Yi had activated was melting from the fire, leaving the people virtually defenseless. Tang Ye radioed for reinforcements. Captain Sun was surprised. The monster could have attacked directly, but instead was affecting a wide area. Jing Ying suggested that the monster was altering the environment in an attempt to destroy them. Hao realized that waiting for reinforcements from headquarters was dangerous. They had to thwart the monster's plan. He didn't panic. The beast was trapped in the mountains, and its vital signs hadn't recovered yet. They had to seize the opportunity and hold the monster back together, putting their training to the test. Jing Ying directed winds at the monster. They caused almost no damage, but they hindered it. Song Rui attacked with electromagnetic grenades while Hao prepared to use his claws. The guy stepped forward and fired a blast of bloody mist right into the monster's face. This temporarily prevented the monster from attacking. It remained lying down, and the people seized the moment to retreat. It soon became clear the people could do almost nothing against this beast. It was beginning to break free from its hiding place. The giant monster smashed the nearby rocks and stood up to its full height. Now everyone admitted it, they were truly in trouble. The monster was gigantic. The mountains barely reached its knees. It was unclear what to do against it, but everyone understood it had to be stopped at any cost. If they didn't, the city would be wiped off the face of the earth. Reinforcements from headquarters wouldn't arrive in time. Tan Ye ordered the regular soldiers to retreat. Fighting the giant beast was beyond their capabilities. The monster opened its jaws and unleashed a breath attack, incinerating everything around it with fire. His comrades were left alone with the monster, with no idea how to deal with it. Tan Ye said, "I'll handle this," and began to activate his ice ability. He created a tall wall of ice that separated the monster from his friends. This didn't solve the problem completely, but it allowed them to catch their breath and gather their thoughts. Tang Ye took on the defense, instructing the others to focus on the attack. Hao couldn't understand if Tang Ye had the power to block the giant's breath. How had the monster managed to break through the ice wall earlier? Sun Rui watched her friend closely, trying to understand what was happening. The monster had overcome the icy barrier and was preparing to destroy the humans. Song Rui was ready. She immediately attacked with electromagnetic charges. Jing Ying simultaneously attacked from the other side with sharp blades of wind. The monster let out loud screams. Hao realized the beast's body was extremely durable. Ranged attacks were almost ineffective. He launched a head-on attack. The young man landed several claw strikes right on the monster's snout. It wouldn't be accurate to say that this helped. Close combat was extremely difficult. The monster was even more aggressive than the beast from the city of Chishi. His friend stood before him again, unsure how to even slightly harm it. Song Rui noticed that the monster had stopped for some reason. Tang Ye guessed that it was tired. Jing Ying checked the sensor. The beast's vital signs had remained low the whole time. But as soon as the eye on its forehead lit up, they spiked sharply. The monster was clearly concentrating its power on purpose. Hao suggested perhaps it had internal injuries, which is why it couldn't sustain each burst of power for long. Captain Sun noted that the eye on the monster's snout was a key target and suggested attacking it first. This time, all four simultaneously directed their attacks at the monster's head. The monster neutralized the blows with crystal explosions and fended off the entire threat. It became clear the beast fully understood all the attacks used by humans. Captain Sun announced that she had a battle plan, but she needed everyone's help to carry it out. She explained the idea. Yan Hao must get close to the monster, attract its attention, and force it to attack him. The monster would use its breath attack from a distance, but Tang Ye would block it with her ice. In the pause between breaths, the monster freezes. That's the moment to strike. Song Rui uses his weapon while Hao uses a quantum blood strike. All attacks hit their mark. The monster couldn't react in time. Jing Yin blew the crystals away with a gust of wind so they wouldn't interfere with the attack. Sun Rui's attacks failed to kill the monster, but temporarily sealed its abilities. Then Tang Ye steps in. He's ready to plunge his icy spear into the monster. The attack went perfectly, but the icy spear didn't head for the monster. It headed for Yan Hao. The boy grabbed the spear, which had pierced his body right through, and crouched down, holding back the pain. The girls were in shock. It seemed that Tang Yi had gone mad, attacking his own ally. The captain didn't respond to their remarks and pulled out a capsule containing an animal core. Now Tang Ye stood near the monster. He said he hadn't expected that even such a beast wouldn't be able to finish off the team. But the beast was weakened, and he had a chance. Captain Sun wanted to understand who he was and what his goal was. Jing Ying suggested he was the traitor they had been searching for all along. And indeed, standing before the girls was a mole in the army who had been constantly leaking information. At first, Tan Ye helped the young people fend off the attacks. It all looked like a show. He laughed. That was the only way to lure them in and win their trust. From the very start of the mission, every move had been calculated. The previous monsters and lords were his pawns, and the scent of blood had awakened the giant beast. Tan Ye wanted to use the monster to deal with his friends and take Yan Hao away, but they turned out to be too resilient. Hao was surprised at how much effort had been expended to capture him. He wanted to know exactly what his pursuer wanted. Tang Ye replied, "You'll find out for yourself once you're on the other side." Jing Ying noticed that the monster's vital signs were fluctuating wildly. It was prepared to sacrifice itself for this attack. Hao told the girls to deal with the monster while he took care of the traitor. The girls grew anxious, hoping that Yan Hao would return alive. Tang Ye declared that he would show his true strength and would no longer pretend to be a B-rank fighter. Hao parried the icy attacks, realizing that eliminating Tang Ye was his only chance of survival. Tang Ye continued to attack, but controlling the giant beast proved more difficult than he had expected. Finally, the men closed in on each other and began hand-to-hand combat. Hao raised his claws against Tang Ye's ice sword. The captain fought with all his might, but the mission came first. Hao grabbed his opponent, and they rolled down the cliff together, then plunged down the mountain. A powerful explosion rang out at the point of impact. But neither was killed, and once again they looked at each other, struck by the strength of their opponent. Tang Ye smiled. He could see that Hao was too confident in his own abilities. The captain reckoned even at his best the guy would barely be able to win, but now it looked as if he were courting death. He directed another stream of ice, intending to completely immobilize Hao. An icy sealing field formed, and the young man's body was partially encased in ice. Tang Ye took advantage of this, rushing forward with his ice sword, preparing for the final blow. But Hao shattered the ice and prepared to fend off the attacks using the power of fire and blood. The battle reached its climax once more. Fire, blood, and ice clashed in a deadly dance, and every move could be decisive. Yan Hao simultaneously activated his beast claws and shadow invisibility, gradually vanishing from his opponent's sight. Tang Ye dismissed this as cheap tricks and began covering everything around him with icy spikes. Hao, remaining invisible, raced down from the top of the gorge to attack the captain from behind and above. It was a decent chance. Meanwhile, the girls continued to fight the monster, but they were struggling to make headway. There was almost nowhere left to retreat. Tanye admitted his opponent was strong and skilled, but victory would still go to the captain. Hao had no intention of discussing anything with the traitor. He activated the energy of the blood mist, preparing for a powerful strike. Tanye held the ice shield with great difficulty using both hands. But Hao simply deflected the blood-red orb, stunned. Tanye couldn't believe that anyone would think such a feeble strike could pierce his defense. Yan Hao, it seemed, had no intention of breaking through the defense. His attack was designed to tear off a huge chunk of rock, which flew downward at breakneck speed. The entire area shook from the rock's impact. Tanye managed to jump out of the way of the rock at the last moment, furious and confident of his victory. But before he could cast ice or any other defense, Hao was already upon him. "I've been looking forward to our little chat," he said. This time, the young man's claws were coated with the queen bee's poison. Nothing could stop him. Tanye was mortally wounded by the beast's claws and poisoned. Blood spurted from his mouth. Hao understood the poison had already penetrated the captain's heart. It was better not to resist and to die peacefully. He added, if Tanye activated his ability now, spreading the poison throughout his body, he would have no chance of victory. Tanye began to transform, screaming that he was part of the Green Vine's core and would never become Hao's prisoner. Having created a protective ice barrier around himself, the captain had no intention of revealing his organization's secrets, even in the face of death. Hao could finally breathe a sigh of relief. His opponent had been incredibly strong, and he himself had expended a great deal of energy. At that moment, the enormous monster the girls had been fighting bowed its head and froze in place. It became clear, Yan Hao had apparently defeated the captain, and because of this, the monster had stopped. Hao approached the girls, exhausted but alive and unharmed. Jing Ying wanted to take Tanye away to interrogate him properly, but Hao said that the captain was dead and hadn't revealed a single piece of information. Sun Rui realized that the people of the Green Vine were far more loyal to their organization than they had thought. The main thing was that everyone had survived. Captain Sun decided they needed to return to headquarters. Their situation was too dangerous to risk any further. But first they had to deal with the enormous monster whose strength had completely run out. They couldn't leave the weakened creature alive. Hao reminded her the captain had claimed that reinforcements were on their way, so they needed to act quickly. Jing Ying looked at the device again. The readings were strange, as if the device had malfunctioned. At that moment, the young people saw a man radiating red mist approaching them. He stopped in front of the monster, which seemed ready to serve him despite its impending death. Jing Ying warned them they needed to be very careful. Her sensor had never reacted so sharply, especially from such a distance. Hao also sensed the stranger's power. Song Rui realized who was standing before them. The man looked at the monster, which was snarling viciously, baring its toothy maw. The next moment, the monster's head was severed with bare hands. Now the man was approaching the people, and it was clear this did not bode well. Everyone saw the beast-like creature, the powerful and handsome Sun Zhao. Sun Rui looked at her uncle, who had just instantly killed the monster, and seemed to have lost his mind in a beastly transformation. Sun Zhao turned to Hao. He had watched his fight and realized that the young man had reached a high level without completing his evolution, meaning he had enormous potential. Yan Hao didn't understand what the creature was talking about. Sun Zhao held out his hand and invited him to join. Together they would create a new world. Hao thought it was utter nonsense and wasn't interested. Sun Rui could no longer hold back. She dropped her weapon and ran toward her uncle, but her body suddenly froze. She had caught the gaze of the beast-like creature. The girl repeated, "I'm Sun Rui, your niece," begging her uncle to recognize her. Jing Ying was confused. Hao was wary. The situation was unique. He remembered himself once, in the beginning, he had been just like Sun Zhao. No one knew in advance would Sun Rui succeed in awakening her uncle, just as Xu had once awakened her brother. One thing was clear, a terrifying thirst for murder emanated from Sun Zhao. If he were angered, he would become even more dangerous. Sun Rui was still trying to wake her uncle, pleading and begging him to return. But suddenly, the monster pierced her body with his hand. Song Zhao lifted his niece, regarding her as a lowly creature with whom he had no intention of interacting. Then he threw the wounded girl aside. She fell right in front of her friends, showing no signs of life. A huge, gaping wound in her chest was bleeding profusely. Jing Ying, despite her intelligence and resourcefulness, didn't know what to do next. Yan Hao felt hatred boiling up inside him. He couldn't turn a blind eye to this situation. He transformed into a terrifying monster, ready to destroy the villain who had killed Song Rui.